Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Broccoli Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Becomes Midnight Child? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. We're getting a report of a villain attack nearby. Status of the attackers are unknown, but initial analysis indicates nothing higher than a C-rank threat. Midnight, you're the closest hero in the area, so we'll leave the situation to you. We'll arrange a few nearby sidekicks to arrive soon as backup. Understood. I'm on the way. Nemuri kept her face schooled in her typical confident smile as she did her best to hide the huff of annoyance she wanted to let out from the nearby fans and civilians around her. Nothing could ever be easy for her, could it? She could already see and hear Shuda's annoyed face and complaints about how this was all part of the job, and always be prepared, but is it really so bad to want an easy day on patrol every now and then? Regardless, she hurried out a quick goodbye to the group gathered near her before running off towards the scene dispatch had directed her to, cursing her decision to wear boots with heels this high the entire way. It was times like this she really missed her old costume. Subtlety and decency be damned. It was fairly easy to tell where she was headed, with the quickly forming crowd gathered around the shopping area that was currently under attack. Why do people always go towards danger, seemingly waiting for a hero to appear and for the show to begin? A lot of people ignorant, intentional or not, to the very real threat that people like her had to risk themselves against to keep them safe. At the very least, nobody had gotten the idea to try and confront the villains themselves. At least not yet. The crowd parted easily as Nemuri ran through, an excited murmur breaking out at her appearance as she surveyed the scene. 3 villains from the looks of it, deciding to break in and loot a few of the local stores in the area for a quick payday. One of them had a mutant-type quirk, giving him the physique of a rhinoceros, while the other 2 were unknown at the moment. They hadn't noticed her arrival yet, which gave her more than enough time to quickly assess the situation. Nemuri closed her eyes and took a breath. Time for the show to begin. Naughty, naughty boys. Didn't your mommies ever tell you not to take what isn't yours? Midnight called out to them, jutting out her hip to the side as pointed her whip towards the nearest villain. Behind her, a few excited gasps came from the crowd, with a few already starting to cheer her on. The villains froze in place and turned to look towards who called out to them, one of them widening his eyes when he realized who it was. Smirking, she gave him a wink as she started taking a few steps towards them. But don't worry, I'll be sure to give you a nice punishment in their place. A second, louder cheer rings out behind her from her words. Or maybe it was the way she was swaying her hips as she walked. Either one was fine. Boss, you were right. It was Midnight that showed up. Just like you said. The second villain, a shorter male with parted auburn hair, shouted at the man next to him. Midnight quirked an eyebrow at the new information. They were prepared for her? She tore away at the parts of her costume around her wrists as she continued to saunter towards them. Oh, don't tell me that you did all this just to get my attention. She shook her head. I always try to make myself available to my fans. You should have approached me that way instead. Pink gas started to seep out of her wrists and towards the small group of villains. Fortunately, there wasn't any wind to interfere, so it would only be a few seconds before it reached them and took effect. Idiots! The villain referred to as Boss, a thin, gaunt man with what could only be described as a terrible-looking bowl cut, shouted at the others. Masks on. Now! He commanded, pulling out a gas mask that he had strapped to his hip and attempted to fasten to his face. Midnight narrowed her eyes as she increased the output of her quirk to reach the villains before they could get the masks on. While laughably simple, gas masks and other filtration devices were the best counter to her quirk. A few people in the crowd must have realized this too, judging by the worried gasps she could hear around her. While Boss may have been quick on the draw, he looked to be the only competent member of the team, with Rhino having too much difficulty attaching a gas mask that was not suited for his own head, and Auburn being too distracted excitedly looking at her to react in time. The second the gas wafted over them, their eyes drooped almost instantly as the temptation of sleep overcame them. Well, 2 out of 3 wasn't bad. Though if it were her old costume, she bet she would have had this wrapped up by now. And now she was annoyed again. Maybe she can ask the Midnight Boys do something to cheer her up later, or just bug Shoyuta until he gives her a fun reaction. One or the other. Boss let out a frustrated growl at her while his two subordinates slumped down to the ground. While his eyes may have been obscured, it wouldn't have taken a genius to figure out that he was both very angry and glaring at her. Unfazed, Midnight points her whip at him, striking another pose. Now, the more you resist, the worse your punishment will be. The villain only responds by flexing his arms, and suddenly where his arms once were there were now suddenly large blades in their place. Definitely an issue considering how little protection her costume gives her, especially since she'll need to somehow get his mask off to subdue him properly. With an angered yell he charges forward, and the crowd gasps in both concern and anticipation. Why can she never get any of the fun villains? It's much more fun to waste time teasing them than it is to get into a fight. Well, if you want to get rough, I'm more than happy to provide. With practiced ease, she effortlessly sidestepped the initial swing, before a follow-up pirouette evades the second frantic slice. He was angered, which made his attacks easier to predict. But as long as that mask stayed on his face, she'd be locked onto the defensive until either someone comes to assist or if he leaves himself open. The crowd erupts in noises of astonishment at her movements, the sounds of camera shutters ringing out. Though it seems the audience plays into her favor, as the cheers seem to be only upsetting the man more. And this is how their dance continued on for the next few minutes. Frenzied slashes thrown out haphazardly while the crowd watched on as she kept herself just out of danger, occasionally shouting out words of encouragement in an effort to help her. While the man may have been the leader of the small group of amateurs, he was clearly not the muscle as he quickly ran out of steam, his breaths becoming more and more labored by the second. It was times like this she wished she had a different weapon of choice. A whip like hers was not the ideal choice for subduing or restraining villains, each attempt foiled by a quick swing of his blade arms. Eventually the two fighters paused, locked in a standstill as they regained their stamina. Mentally, Midnight regarded with smug pride at how he seemed far more out of breath than she was. Suddenly, the villain tensed his whole body up, shakily raising his arms above his head. His breaths wheezing through the gas mask, he reared back to swing, despite being several meters away from her. Her ears picked up the sound of someone shouting loudly from the crowd, followed by several people making exclamations of surprise, but she didn't have the time to focus on what was happening over there at the moment. The villain swung his arm forward, only the blade didn't follow through with the rest of his arm, instead it detached from his body and shot straight towards her. A desperation attack? Or a planned surprise? Her reflexes were thankfully honed well enough to move her head out of the way of the hurtling blade, but it was only a narrow miss. Unfortunately, the blade managed to clip one of the wings on the rim of her glasses, ripping them off of her face. Luckily, she was more than capable of seeing even without her iconic eyewear. What was the real issue was how disoriented she was from the sudden change in visibility. He still had one blade attached to his body, and every moment spent distracted was a moment he could close in on her. Midnight took a step back to try and gain her bearings, which was when those DMN heels of hers decided they didn't want to cooperate anymore, making her stumble back onto the ground. She could no longer hear him anymore, the crowd around them shouting out indecipherable noise at this point. Looking forward, she could make out a figure right in front of her with their arm raised. Instinctively, she braced herself on her back leg and raised her arms in some form of defense. Blade catching was a skill that existed, right? Well, time to see if she was a natural at it. With a roar that she managed to hear even above the noise of the crowd, the villain swung his arm down. Her body braced for the impact, and it never came. She felt the force of the swing push lightly against her, only to never feel the dreaded sensation of blade cutting skin. The noise from the crowd cutting off abruptly as silence rang out through the shopping center. A cough from right in front of her brought her focus onto what had happened. The blade had connected, but it wasn't with her. She couldn't make out too many details, but all she knew that it was a boy with green hair and that he was young. Far too young to be running into villain attacks and throwing himself in front of a potentially lethal attack at the very least. His body shook slightly, which she quickly recognized as his body entering shock, but he held his position standing in front of her as a shield between the hero and the villain. Speaking of, the villain seemed just as stunned by the sudden interference, and she knew this was her chance. As terrible as it might sound for her to think, helping the boy was the second priority behind stopping the villain attack. Quickly, she reached forward and pulled the mask forward off of his face. She then shoved her other hand through the gap in between and let loose with her quirk. The villain was knocked out almost instantly from the sheer volume of gas he was exposed to. Letting go of the mask, the elastic around his head slapped it back onto his face and knocked him down to the ground. Midnight immediately turned her head towards the crowd. "Call an ambulance." Immediately several people started following her orders, and while a few others yelled back that they had already done so, she ignored those as she focused on the boy. "Kid, are you all right?" she asked as she grabbed onto him to support his body while she assisted him in laying down on his back. The cut seemed to be only on his front, which would help to reduce blood loss a little bit. And there was a lot of blood loss. She swore to herself at the size of the gash along his body. The cut was clean, slicing diagonally from his shoulder down to his waist, and had gone straight through his thin uniform and a considerable distance through his torso as well. She was glad that he had spread out his arms when he did. There was chance that he may have lost a limb if he had the idea to use his arms to block the blade. Thankfully, he was smart enough not to try and stop a sword with his hands. She felt his body tense as he breathed in a strained breath of air. She could hear him making sounds with his mouth in an effort to talk, but he couldn't make the words out. This was bad. He was starting to panic from the injuries. At least this was a problem that she could help him with. "You're going to be okay. You're just in shock from the injury. I'm going to use my quirk on you to help you calm down, all right?" She brought her wrist up towards his face and slowly released some of the gas into his nose. The effects were almost immediate, his tense body relaxing instantly as his head drooped down to rest on his shoulder. On second thought, that may have been too much. Another commotion came from the crowd to her side before a voice called out her name. Turning to look towards it, she saw another hero had arrived on the scene and was running towards the two of them. They sure took their sweet time getting here. Someone in the crowd filled me in on what happened. I'm a sidekick from the Dayton agency. I can get him to the nearest hospital quicker than waiting here for an ambulance could. The hero said, holding her arms out to take the boy. Midnight felt her hands twitch around him, hesitant to hand him over for a brief moment. She didn't like the idea of handing him over before getting the chance to thank him, chastise him for throwing himself into danger like that, as well as learning what his name was. Although maybe not in that order. But she also knew he was better off in a hospital than he was waiting with her. Gently, she exchanged him with the other hero. "What hospital will you be going to? I want to see him when he wakes up. I'm not too sure which one is closest, but whichever one that is. One of our navigators is getting me the route right now." She nodded. "All right. He's lost a lot of blood, so try to be gentle." The hero smiled as she turned to leave. "Of course. Ingenium would be real upset if I gave him anything other than a first-class trip," she shouted as she started to run off through the crowd. Seeing the two disappear from her sight, Midnight finally let out a sigh of relief. That was certainly not what she was anticipating would happen when she accepted the call to assist. A brief brush with death, and young kid sacrificing himself to save her? Not exactly a normal day in heroics. Usually when a villain fight had concluded, the crowd would cheer for the hero in victory for a bit before continuing on with their lives. But this time the crowd stayed, a worried murmur rumbling through them as the sounds of approaching police sirens could be heard. It had taken a few hours for the fallout of that attack to be dealt with and for Nemuri to finally reach the hospital. A few hours too many if she was being honest. Was it really necessary for the police to ask that many questions before letting her leave? And was today such a slow news day that the media had to show up too? Hopefully they don't make her look bad tonight. She had given them some pretty terse answers. And to make things even more confusing, some of the things the people in the crowd had told made her even more eager to talk to this boy that almost died helping her. Right before that villain shot his arm at you, he screamed out for you to watch out and pushed through the crowd after you. Was the villain's attack obvious and she just missed it? Did he know the attack was coming somehow? Or maybe he has a precognition quirk or something and was trying to help her at the last second. Well, she'd know soon. That is, if he was all right and able to talk. She approached the receptionist counter, the woman sitting there already smiling and waiting for her since she came through the door. "Hi, was there a young boy admitted here a few hours ago? He was injured in a villain attack." She paused for a second. He had green hair too. There we go. Everything she knew. He sure was. "Let me just check for a name and room number for you, Midnight." She smiled before tapping away at her computer for a few seconds. Suddenly, her brows furrowed as she leaned into the screen for a second. "Oh," was all she said. Turning back to Nemuri, the smile returned just as quick as it had disappeared. "He's in the last room on the second floor. I'll let the doctor know you're heading there, Midnight." Now it was Nemuri's turn to furrow her own eyebrows. Thank you. Did you find what his name was?" "The doctor will explain everything." Her smile didn't falter. Bidding her a confused goodbye, Nemuri headed for the elevator with the hope that the receptionist was just a weirdo. Stepping out of the elevator on the second floor, she was almost immediately greeted by a man in a white coat. Presumably, the aforementioned doctor. "Ah, Midnight. I was just called about your arrival. What can we help you with?" He greeted her with another large smile, and she quickly changed her hopes that it was only the receptionist and this doctor that were the weirdos. "I'm looking for a boy that would have been brought in a few hours ago. The woman downstairs said he was in the last room on this floor." And a sinking feeling rose in her stomach when his smile dropped almost immediately too. "Please follow me, I'll explain on the way," the doctor said before turning down the hall without looking back. Suppressing her doubts, she followed after him. "Is he all right?" He hummed in response. "Well, yes, he's recovered from his injuries. In fact, he's cleared for discharge." Her eyes widened at the news and she felt most of her stress leave her immediately. "He's okay? Thank goodness." It took her a second to process everything he said before she raised an eyebrow in confusion. "Wait, discharge already? Shouldn't he be monitored for a bit at least?" "Normally, yes," he answered, tilting his head. "But there are special circumstances involving him. We're mainly just waiting for his caretaker to arrive to collect him." He finished, stopping and turning to face her as they reached a door. What kind of circumstances? Was the obvious question to ask. What possible reason would there be to not follow procedure on this child? "See for yourself," was all he said, before grabbing a clipboard attached to the door and handing it to her, something she was pretty sure he wasn't allowed to do, before standing there and waiting. Taking the clipboard, she quickly scanned it for any relevant information she could find. The first thing she looked for was the name, finally a name, and saw that his name was Izuku. "No last name?" she asked, seeing the section left blank. "An orphan, I believe. Hence the caretaker mentioned previously," was the answer she was given. Understandable, considering. Nemuri looked back up at the doctor, whose attitude she was getting real sick of, with a look that asked him to explain. "Please keep reading." Returning to the file, there didn't seem to be anything else out of the ordinary. Age 12, definitely too young to run into a villain fight. Address was listed as an orphanage/foster home located in Mizudafu. Quirkless. Blood type O. She did a double take. "He's quirkless?" "That's right." The doctor confirmed with a nod. The hero that brought him in was surprised to learn this too. She wouldn't lie and say she wasn't surprised. Quirkless people are fairly rare nowadays, and quirkless kids are even rarer. Granted, it wasn't like quirkless people would go around parading themselves for everyone to see, they tended to keep to themselves for good reason. Guess she'd have to throw out that precognition quirk theory of hers. Though that answer brought up a new question. Why does him being quirkless mean that he has to discharge early? She glared at him. She already knew she wasn't going to like whatever his answer was going to be. "As you can see, we're a very busy hospital. I'm afraid to say we need to prioritize other patients first over this one. Though I can assure you, I wouldn't have cleared him to leave without being sure he was okay to go." He smiled at her. "I'm sure you understand. You heroes have to make similar decisions out there too, right? That would be how he was injured in the first place." It was times like this Nemuri wished she could glare as well as show Yuta, or at the very least yell at someone like Hisashi could. Not only could she tell the hospital was nowhere near busy today, but the very idea of him being justified in treating a patient worse because of their quirk is deplorable. And let's not even get into the part where he said she'd let a child get mortally wounded because of basic discrimination. Did she say weirdo earlier? Upgrade that comment to a-hole. Yeah, she was done with this guy. Still, it's not like she can start a fight with a doctor right in the middle of a hospital. I understand your reasoning. That you're a terrible person. However, I'd still like to pay him a small visit first before his caretaker arrives. She gave him a smile in return, hoping that she's conveying the correct amount of rage with her eyes. The doctor reaches forward to take the clipboard back from her, so it seems like she wasn't angry enough yet. If you'd still like to see him, then I suppose so. He gestures towards the door, a look of surprise breaking out as the hero pushes past him towards the door. Just remember that we will have to move him on once they get here. Right. Was all Namuri said before she slid the door open and walked in. She wasn't sure what she was expecting to see when she entered the room given the way that the doctor had been speaking about him. She was almost expecting to see him still half dead on the floor, with maybe something stupid like a band-aid tacked onto his shoulder. Thankfully, he was in the bed, perfectly healthy by all appearances and with his head buried in a notebook. Now that she was actually wearing her glasses and that the situation was less frantic with a life in the balance, Namuri was able to take in what exactly Izuku looked like properly this time. 3 words came to mind from an initial glance at him: small, cute, and green. In addition to his hair, he had piercing bright green eyes that were currently narrowed as they rapidly scanned whatever he was reading. The only other distinguishing feature on his face were the freckles on his face, which had aligned into small diamond shapes on his cheeks, which definitely made him look cute. And he certainly looked like a 12-year-old, since he was so small and skinny. She stood on the other side of the room, observing him while he continued to work away in his own little world. She must have waited there for a few minutes before finally he looked away from the book, seemingly satisfied with whatever it was he had done in there. He must have finally noticed that he wasn't alone in the room anymore when his eyes moved towards the door and met her own. Smiling, Namuri gave him a small wave, while Izuku seemed to freeze in place at the sight of her. She wished she had a camera to record the sudden look of panic-stricken horror on his face when his brain finally caught up to who he was looking at. A minute-sen. When did you get here? His face paled even more. Hello. He quickly bent his body forward, in an awkward bow from his sitting position. Thank you for saving me today. Keep calm. Whatever you do, don't laugh at him. Trying her best to ignore his freak-out, she gave him a dismissive wave. It's fine. No need to bow, Izuku. The small squeak he let out from hearing his name was not helping her self-control in the slightest. If anything, I should be thanking you for running in to help me like that. Instantly, his head rocketed back up and she swore his eyes were even wider than they were previously. No, I didn't do anything. His arms started flailing around him wildly. I really just got in your way if you think about it. He all but shouted in denial. No need to be so modest, kid. If you didn't run in, I would probably be the one in the hospital instead of you. He opened his mouth to protest more, but she cut him off. As much as I agree that you shouldn't have done it, you did. But if you didn't, things would have been a lot worse, so thank you. Izuku just stared at her, wide-eyed and mouth agape as he processed her words. A moment later his lips started wobbling as his eyes narrowed with tears. You really think I helped? He questioned, his voice barely above a whisper. Namuri gave him a soft smile, moving in closer to place a hand on his shoulder. She could feel her heart ache with every soft sniffle that he failed to hold back. Definitely. I don't know how, but you were the only one there that knew what that villain was going to do, so you did what you could to help. His eyes darted down towards the book on his lap before returning to meet hers. He rubbed away a few of the tears building in his eyes. It wasn't anything special. Anyone could have noticed what he was about to do. She tilted her head. Well, nobody else there including the hero who was fighting him noticed. Don't sell yourself short. Following where his eyes traveled, she too looked at the notebook on his lap. Were you writing about what happened in this book? He let out another noise, his arms quickly shooting down in an effort to conceal the book. No. I mean yes. He shuffled away from her touch awkwardly. Maybe. There was a very real chance that this was his diary or personal journal or something similar, but curiosity still got the best of her. Can you please show me? Seeing the hesitant look on his face, she pushed forward a little more. You can keep holding the book if you like, I'd just like to see what you wrote. If worse comes to worse and it was something personal, she could always write a message of encouragement or something in there, or maybe just an autograph. No, it's okay. He sighed. H here, was all he said before he quickly flipped open the book to the last marked page and gently handing it to her. What greeted her was a double-paged spread of information all on the villain the two of them had met a few hours ago, who Izuku had titled as Blade Arm Villain, complete with a fairly well-drawn diagram of the man in the center of one page. There were arrows pointing to several parts of his body, each labeling an observation or detail about the villain. Her eyes locked on to a specific arrow pointing to his elbow joints, talking about how the joint looked similarly to the joint of a model or figure, indicating that the blade, or other potential weapons, could be attached or detached to his arm. On the other page was a hastily written paragraph about the man's fighting style, and observed strengths and weakness, as well as possible methods of countering him. To say she was surprised was an understatement. You got all of this just from viewing the fight I had with him? She asked, looking up at him. Izuku averted his eyes, laughing nervously. Yeah. It's a habit of mine to watch hero fights and write down notes about everything I see. He paused for a second, thinking about something. There's, a page on you too, earlier in the book. If you'd like to see it. Now that got her attention. Returning back to the book, she flicked through the pages, seeing countless other observations he'd made, most of which were on heroes and sidekicks she knew that operated in the local area. It was about a third of the way into the book where she found the page on herself. The first thing she was glad for was that the image of her drawn was much more flattering than some of the others she had passed by. She could thank her high number of reference material for that, with the picture showcasing an action pose of her swinging her whip around. There were fewer arrows pointing to her, although she was proud of the one pointing to her waist that said she had high SEC appeal, and the words written were much neater too. Reading over the information, she noted that almost all of it was accurate, with only a few questions or what-if sections near the bottom of the pages. So either he's pieced together all the information I've given out in interviews over the years, or he figured this all out himself just from watching me. Probably a bit of both. This is really good, Izuku. She commented while going over the weaknesses section. Almost everything you've written here is accurate. She looked up and smirked at him. And the picture is well done too. Izuku's face quickly flushed pink as he suddenly found the view outside the window very interesting. Oh, I knew if you were to ever see the page, you'd want your picture to look good, so I tried a little harder with it. Well, it has my seal of approval. She watched Izuku let out a sigh of relief. If you would like, I could help you answer some of the things you've written here in the questions section. Izuku's head swiveled to face her, and his face lit up like she had just told him he had woken up on Christmas morning. Really? Thank you so much, he exclaimed, before bowing a second time. It's no problem. Consider it my way of thanking you for helping today, she said, before the smirk reappeared on her face. However, there's just one itty-bitty little catch. Izuku's face dropped like he remembered the date today was not actually Christmas. What kind of catch? The smirk shifted slightly into a smugger smile. It's simple. I'm not going to tell you the answers, I'm going to show you. Izuku's eyes widened. You mean that? That's right. You can see for yourself next time I'm out on patrol. I'll take you with me so you can get a nice up-close look. She answered with a wink. No, I couldn't possibly. Too late. My mind has been made up. If you're that worried about it, just pretend that you're my personal sidekick for the day. Izuku looked like he wanted to protest more but seemed to either give up or realize that he wasn't going to change her mind. Taking this as an admission of defeat, she continued. Great. With that settled, I can give you this back. Closing the notebook, she moved to hand it back over to him, when her eyes caught on to words written on the cover. Moving her hand out of the way, she saw what he had titled the notebook. Hero Analysis for the Future, 11? She questioned. She looked back up at the boy, who looked stuck at a stage between embarrassed and mortified. Do you want to become a hero, Izuku? Izuku's fists clenched on his lap, his knuckles turning white. His face showcased a series of emotions as he attempted to come up with an answer. Eventually, the look his face decided on was shame. He turned away back to the window and breathed out a small yes. Nemuri looked back down at the notebook in her fingers. So this is more than just a hobby for him. She was sure this wasn't the right time to ask, but she had her own question for him now. The doctor told me earlier that you're quirkless, Izuku. A frown grew on her face from observing him. As soon as she said the word, quirkless, his entire body tensed. But it was his face that gave it away, shifting into a look of fear, before a just as fast change to resignation. Can you tell me why you want to become a hero, Izuku? Izuku kept looking out the window as he answered, his voice far lower than his normal speaking volume. It's just what I've always wanted to do since I was little. I want to help people, to make them feel safe and to reassure them with a smile. I want someone to see me and to know that they'll be all right because I'm there. Nemuri gave a soft smile, raising her hand to his back. That's a wonderful answer, Izuku. Izuku turned back to look at her, his eyes locked onto hers. Do you think that I can become a hero, Midnight? Despite what some might think, Nemuri was not an idiot. There were thousands of people every year with good quirks that failed to become a hero, and just as many that did become heroes that either retired early due to injury or stress or were unfortunately killed in action. And that was the people with good quirks. Being a hero wasn't easy, it involved near constant high levels of work and effort, and the failure to meet any standards would result in either the death of civilians or of the hero themselves. It was for that reason that the profession had such an emphasis on quirks. They were borderline essential for easing the stress on the workload by at least a little bit. Having a quirk that could help in a fight, in investigating villains or clearing a disaster zone was vitally important in a career that required speed and efficiency. Having no quirk to assist at all would require the individual to work astronomically hard to keep up with the workload, and even then, they might still be more inefficient than everyone around them. But she knew from looking at Izuku's face that this wasn't the first time he had asked someone this question, and though they might have been less in-depth than her, they likely also thought that it was borderline impossible. Saying no to him would likely be completely destroying this kid's dreams, if they weren't destroyed already. But then she remembered the answer he just gave her, and that figure that stood in front of her, taking a near-fatal blow without a hint of hesitation. She took a deep breath before answering. That depends on you, Izuku. Looked at her, confused. As if she said something unexpected, and she probably did. I won't lie to you, it'll be very difficult. Bordering impossible, even. Would you still be willing to try? To put in more effort and work harder than everyone else? Yes. He answered instantly. Good answer. Then in that case, yes, I do think you can become a hero. It had taken Izuku nearly half an hour to calm down after hearing Midnight answer his question. But that was pretty good if you ask him. After all, she said yes. He had to keep pinching and kicking himself to make sure this wasn't a dream, or a coma that he entered after nearly getting sliced in two. But here he was, 2 days later, and he hadn't woken up yet. That could only be good news. Unless the coma theory was true, then it was bad. While he would admit, needing Midnight to hug him while he bawled his eyes out and blubbered thank you over and over wasn't his proudest moment, he wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. He had managed to help someone in need, a hero too, and someone told him that it was possible for him to become a hero. If you ignore the hospital trip, it was pretty much the best day of his life. Who was he kidding? Even with the hospital trip, it was still the best day of his life. Which made it an interesting contrast to what he was sure would be one of the worst days of his life coming up, his first day back at school since the incident. While it wouldn't be the worst day ever, the top 3 were hopefully set in stone at this point, he was sure it'd rank somewhere in the top 10 if it went the way he was expecting it to. And there was a very good reason for him to think so. As it turned out, there was a news report on the knife-arm villain attack, the night he was in the hospital. And there was video footage taken. With him in it. Fortunately, The news didn't know who he was and didn't explicitly talk about him. But according to Sanai-san, if you knew who he was, it was pretty obvious that it was him in the video. Which was a problem considering he was about to enter a building full of people that knew who he was, and he doubted that nobody watched the news that night. Timing his approach perfectly, he slipped onto the school grounds when there were only a few students hanging around and made a dash for the main building. Once inside, he took a deep breath, said a small prayer to be left alone and headed for his classroom. Opening the door to the room, he maintained eye contact with the floor as he tried to shuffle to his desk before anyone could stop him. A lot of the conversations going on when he entered either died off or got quieter, and he could feel the eyes looking at him, but that was a normal occurrence. Taking his seat, he took a deep sigh in relief that he had got there in one piece. Now all he had to— Deku! Well, so much for that. Looking up, he was greeted with the narrowed eyes and snarling face of Katsuki Bakugo. Something that was usually not a good sign for his short-term health. Almost all conversation had died off at this point, choosing to instead witness what was going to happen next. Oh, gee, good morning, Kaken. When he was met with only a deepened scowl, he pushed his luck. Do you need something? Cut the crap, Deku. Bakugo shouted, slamming his hands on Izuku's desk, and he did not squeak in response. What's all this shit about you getting into a villain attack about? He yelled, leaning his face in so much Izuku had to tilt his chair backwards. Well, a couple days ago, I was watching a villain attack when suddenly I decided to run in and help. This was apparently the wrong answer to give. Bakugo only seemed to get even angrier at the story, his hands beginning to shoot off small sparks into Izuku's desk. Good thing he hadn't placed his books down yet. Give me a break. You? Help? What would you even do? You just get in the way and get yourself killed. WL, both the news report and the hero said that I helped out. Any hero that would need your help is probably so much of a busted D-lister that they'd be better off retiring and hiding in a ditch somewhere. Maybe it was because she had been the one to finally support him, but Izuku felt the need to speak up in this case. Midnight is a great hero, Kaken, he said, glaring straight back at him. Bakugo's eyes lost the intensity for a moment, widening in surprise. But as quick as they did that, they were quickly back to glaring, and even angrier than ever. We'll be talking about this later, Deku, was all he said before standing up straight and stomping towards his desk, loudly pulling the chair out and flopping into it. Izuku simply stared at him for a few moments in surprise. That's probably not good. Satisfied with the morning entertainment, the rest of the class went back to whatever they were doing before, giving Izuku some well-deserved peace to relax and calm down from his daily scare. Hey, Deku? Tuning back into the world, he turned his head towards the voice that just spoke to him. It belonged to the girl that sat in the seat next to him. She had a large flower growing on the top of her head. Yes, Hanabira-san? Did you really get to meet Midnight? He assumed Hanabira wouldn't find the answer. Why yes, and not only that but she reaffirmed my hopes and dreams and hugged me while I cried, as amazing and enthralling as he did, so he settled for just a simple nod and yes. Her face lit up, some of the petals of her flower wiggling slightly. Really? I'm so jealous. Did you get her autograph? He opened his mouth to answer when his brain froze in horrid realization. Hanabira giggled. I'm guessing that's a no? I would have thought that'd be the first thing you did. Izuku's head fell into his hands. It wasn't his fault. It was an emotional afternoon. He mentally hit himself for being so stupid. Arg, she even had the analysis page about her open. It was the perfect time. He shook his head. I can't believe I forgot. He said, his voice dead. It's okay, maybe there'll be a next time? Hanabira suggested, still holding another laugh. Before he could answer about how much he screwed up and that he couldn't recover from this, someone else spoke up before him. Hey Hana-chan, why were you talking to Deku? One of her friends asked, a group of them walking over. Oh. Hanabira seemed just as surprised by their appearance. No reason. It was at that point that Izuku decided to tune out of that conversation and focus on getting his things ready. Class would be starting soon. The laughter that came from beside him told him that was probably the right decision. Surprisingly, the day ended up not being as bad as he expected going into it. The only abnormal incident was when one of the older students tried to tear off his clothes in the middle of the hallway to see if he had any scars from the incident, which he did, but he wasn't exactly eager to show that off. Plus, he didn't want to bother the school nurse for a third replacement uniform so soon. Other than that, his teachers threw out the occasional jeers about his tendency to into trouble, but that stuff was par for the course, really. What was concerning him was Kaken. Despite his ominous words this morning, he had mostly left Izuku alone for the rest of the day. While his friends may have given him the usual verbal beatdown, Kaken himself had barely acknowledged him at all, which was never a good sign of things to come. Izuku hated the waiting part. At least when he was actually being hit, he didn't need to stress about when they were going to finally corner him. Walking out of the main building, the first thing he noticed was a small crowd of students gathered around the main gates. Was something going on? A villain attack? Probably not. There'd likely be a bigger commotion if that was the case. He decided to steer clear of whatever it was. He never did well in crowds, especially around his peers. Shuffling around the edge of the group, he maneuvered his way past and turned to start walking back home. Or at least that was his plan. Izuku! A voice called from behind him. There you are. He felt the panic raise for a second at being called out in public, before his brain caught up to him. There's only a couple of people in the world that actually called him Izuku, and that list gets even narrower when you include people that want to talk to him. He turned back to the mass of students, and sure enough, making her way through the gathering was the familiar figure of the R-rated hero, Midnight. While his immediate thought was, why is she here? That was quickly replaced with, how did she know he was here? He didn't remember saying what school he attended or giving her any contact information, although in fairness he was emotionally compromised for a lot of their talk. She didn't look him up in a database, did she? That'd be really embarrassing. Midnight sauntered over to him, the congregation of students following her and slowly encircling him as well. While this was quickly turning into the opposite of what he wanted, Midnight seemed unfazed. Don't you know it's rude to keep a girl waiting, Izuku? She teased with a smirk, and Izuku hoped that the other students were too busy murmuring to themselves about what was currently happening to notice the blush creeping on his face. Eminence-sen, what are you doing here? Was the best he could get out, despite his brain mashing the "don't panic" button in his head. Midnight looked amused for a moment, before her face morphed into a grin. Did you already forget? I'm here to fulfill our little deal. She pointed her whip at him. I'm going on patrol, and you'll be my sidekick. The various noises of shock coming around made him wish that Midnight would choose her words a little more carefully. If the news report put a bigger target on his back than usual, then this was a giant, neon arrow pointing at him. Time to do some damage control. All right now? I don't think that I can dash. No time to talk. I'm already late from standing here waiting for you, so let's get going. She started to stride past him, giving him a light tap on the shoulder with her whip as she passed by. Quickly now. Before I need to use my whip, give you some motivation? His eyes widened. He's seen what that whip can do, and he does not want to be on the receiving end of it. Even he has pain tolerance limits. He jogged after her to cover the distance, ignoring the countless sets of eyes watching him. Coming! From back at the gates, a set of red eyes narrowed at the retreating figures. Izuku stood off to the side, watching as Midnight waved off a small family that had gathered around them while they were walking down the street. Awkwardly, he joined in the wave after the little girl in the family called out to him. Once they had finally moved off far enough away that he'd feel silly to keep waving, he stopped with a sigh of relief. This had been what the majority of his afternoon had been like after he was basically forced to accompany Midnight through her afternoon patrol. There hadn't been much time for the two of them to talk. The waves of fans and admirers had been relentless ever since they left the area around school. And that was okay. He was more than fine watching the daily actions of a hero up close. He was always too nervous to approach one normally. He was just less of a fan of the times when somebody would notice him shadowing her and he would get dragged into the meet and greet. This is much better than last time, isn't it? Midnight asked, stretching her arms. Just a nice, relaxing walk greeting some fans. And hey, You might even have some fans now too. She grinned. Izuku slouched, looking down at the ground. She thought I was a new hero called Midnight Mini. This time Midnight did laugh. A pretty good name, I'd say. And it could be worse, she could have given you a name that was an insult. Izuku scratched his head. I guess. Besides, you should be smiling more anyway. It's a beautiful afternoon, people are smiling, and there's no blade arm villain to ruin it for everyone. Actually, he's officially called the knife arm villain. Midnight shrugged. I like the name you gave him better. Makes him sound more dangerous. Izuku decided to not let her know that he had already updated his notebook to the new name. Midnight looked up at the sky, noting the mixture of dark blue and orange painting the horizon. I'd say now's a good time for us to stop for today. She turned back to Izuku, her eyes narrowed in a dangerous smile. Now then. She pointed her whip at him. Question time. Tell me everything you learned about being a hero following me around today. Wait, what? She winked at him. You didn't think we were doing this for fun, did you? She shook her head. Of course not. If you're serious about becoming a hero, you need to start learning about what you'll be expected to do in the future. Izuku felt his hands twitch. He should probably have gotten his notebook out a while ago. You mean stuff like how to fight villains? Not quite. Midnight gave him a quick once-over. You're still pretty young, there'll be plenty of time for combat and muscle training when you're older. What I want you to focus on right now is the other aspects of being a hero. Fighting villains might put you on headlines, but there are plenty of extra responsibilities that come with the job. He slipped his hand into his bag and pulled out his notebook, already scrambling to record every word of wisdom she had just given him. I actually turned 13 pretty soon, if that helps. Oh. Midnight tilted her head. Are you that eager to learn how to fight? Izuku glanced up and froze at the look she was giving him. I'll warn you, I don't hold back on my sparring partners. She punctuated the statement with a quick lick of her lips. Izuku ducked his head back into his book. So, what kind of other responsibilities are there? He squeaked out. He heard Midnight chuckle at him before she answered. You tell me, Izuku. What did you see me do today? He mentally ran through everything that they had done this afternoon. You spent time interacting with fans? Correct. Can you tell me why I did that? He remembered an answer that All Might once gave on this subject in an interview a few years ago. It's to help them feel safe, right? To let them know that you're there? She smiled. That sounds like an answer All Might would give, but you're right. The main reasons that we're meant to be approachable to citizens on the street is that it reassures them. If a hero is there and appears relaxed enough to talk to them, then the area must be safe, right? He nodded, and she continued. It also means that a person is more likely to seek you out for help. They feel better approaching a person that they know will listen to them, you know? If Izuku wrote words down any faster, the pages in his book were liable to catch on fire. Of course, there are exceptions. Some heroes like Endeavor are fairly unapproachable, but he makes up for it by building a reputation of being the most reliable in a crisis instead. Well, that and some people like the harsher treatment. Oh. He spoke up, looking up at her. Is that why that guy asked you to hit him with your whip earlier? Forget about that guy. But Izuku. One look at her face was enough for him to drop the question, though he made a mental note to see if Sanai-san would know the answer later. Satisfied that he had moved on, Midnight continued. So, we had interacting with civilians. What else did I do today? Izuku paused in thought. To tell the truth, he hadn't really noticed her do anything else other than interact with fans. Did he miss something obvious, or was she doing something in secret the whole time? Midnight laughed, bringing him out of his thoughts. You look like you might need a hint. It's not easy to notice unless you look for it. And don't worry, she winked again. I wasn't hiding it or keeping a secret from you. He clenched his jaw shut. Was he muttering out loud again? Let me ask you a different question. She started. Do you remember those high school students we ran into not long after we started? High school students? Izuku quickly racked his brain to remember. Do you mean that group of boys where you fixed one of their ties? Midnight smiled and nodded. That's the one. Her head tilted. So? Did you see what I did? Izuku was officially lost now. Did that not count as interacting with civilians? You made sure he looked presentable? The hero responded with another laugh. I suppose that's not untrue. Boys that wear their uniforms properly are much more attractive. She fixed a sterner gaze on Izuku. Flip your thinking around. Instead of what I did, what were they doing? Izuku's memory was working in overdrive now. I think when you called out to them, they were walking together into an alley? They were. Midnight confirmed. You seem to be having trouble, so I'll help you with the rest. There was a villain in that alley. Izuku felt himself physically recoil from the shock of that last sentence. There was? How do you know that? The hero folded her arms as she explained. I suppose it was a bit unfair to expect you to notice when you weren't even aware of what we were looking for. A frown crossed her face. To put it simply, there are villains going around town distributing drags to high school students. His eyes practically bulged out of sockets. Why would they do that? Midnight shrugged. Who knows? For fun? To intentionally cause chaos? We're not sure yet. But what we do know is that they pick targets they think are vulnerable, like students. And those students you stopped, they were going to meet with the villain? That I'm not sure about. They were either about to meet up, or they were about to be targeted. Regardless, once I called out to those boys, the villain retreated and the deal was off. Izuku felt his fists tighten around his pencil and book. But why didn't you, try to catch the villain? Midnight tapped her temple. Remember what we just discussed about me reassuring civilians? It wouldn't give them any peace of mind if I started shouting at and chasing a villain out of nowhere, would it? As much as he wanted to think that catching the villain was the right move, he couldn't argue with that. So, that means the villain got away? Midnight moved in closer to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. Not quite. She fixed him a smirk. Because now we know that they operate in this area. A friend of mine is investigating this case, and knowing that they appeared here will help him track them down. She smiled. And that's reason 2 for going on patrol, gathering intel. Sensing that he should get back to recording notes, Izuku flipped his notebook back open and began scribbling furiously to catch up to what she was currently saying. Very nicely, Midnight waited for him to finish writing before she continued. Plus, you can be sure that the villain won't be keen on showing up in this area again anytime soon, now that they know a hero is monitoring it. And with that we have reason 3, deterrence. She took a deep breath and stretched. Have you got all that? Because I think we've had enough lectures for one afternoon. One question. He brought his hand up as if he were in a classroom. Is it really all right to tell me the details of a villain investigation? I don't see why not. She answered flippantly. If you're planning to be a hero, should be aware of the kinds of cases they deal with. Oh, I see. He mused, absorbing everything he had been told in the last few minutes, before finishing up and placing his book back in his bag. Thank you so much for teaching me all this, Midnight-san. She waved her hand dismissively. It's no trouble, Izuku. She beamed back at him. Besides, now you know what to look out for next time, right? Yeah, definite. Wait. Next time? Of course. He couldn't tell if the grin on her face was more smug or more mischievous. I believe I promised to help you answer those questions about me in that book of yours. But silly me, I forgot to do that today. Her tone of voice told him this was a very intentional error. It's fine. You already gave me so much today that I dash. Nope. A deal is a deal, Izuku. And what kind of hero would I be if I broke a promise? She declared, too proud of herself for tricking a 12-year-old. I'll have to just keep taking you on patrols with me until I can find the time to help you with your notebook. Izuku had the sinking feeling in his gut that Midnight planned to never help him with his notebook analysis on her. Flipping her hair off her shoulder, Midnight started to walk down the street back the way they came. Come on then. It's getting dark and you need to get home soon. He felt his face heat up at the thought of needing a personal escort back to the orphanage. I'm fine. I know the way from here, so there's no need to worry. Izuku. The hero turned to him with an unimpressed glare. I just told you that there was a villain in the area, and you think I'll let you walk home alone in the dark? Well, he couldn't really argue with that, could he? Rubbing his neck in embarrassment, he moved up beside her as they walked down the street. That reminds me, can you give me a way to contact you? I'd rather make you come to me next time instead of waiting outside a middle school for 10 minutes. Midnight asked. Oh, okay. Taking his phone out, he handed it to her so she could enter the right information. He also ignored the snicker she made at seeing his limited edition All Might phone case. After a few moments, she handed it back and Izuku tried his best to not freak out that he finally had someone to message with the device. And it was a hero too. Now let's hurry up, I'm sure you have homework you need to get done tonight too. She teased, and Izuku paused. He totally did. And he forgot somehow. He was gonna have to pull an all-nighter with all the work he had to do tonight. He usually had a pretty good memory, but this was the second time today. Wait a second, that's right. He spoke up, Midnight turning to look at him with interest. Before we go, can I have your autograph, Midnight-san? Izuku yawned as he walked down the path towards school. He definitely didn't get enough sleep last night, but could you blame him? He had so much new material on being a hero that he had to compile and organize. Finding multiple references and examples to back up everything Midnight had said wasn't easy, after all. Not only that, but he had to so much research on that villain she was talking about too. What if he missed a sign that they were around, and someone got hurt because he didn't do enough research? He couldn't live with himself if that happened. But despite all those, very justified, reasons, he still wished he had gotten more sleep to prepare for today. Remember what he said yesterday about it, how it was going to be one of the worst days of his life? Well, as it turned out, it was a pretty good day. One of the best ones, even. But today? Make no mistake, today was going to SEK. Thankfully, he had convinced Midnight to settle for dropping him off just outside home, where nobody else would have seen them together, but at school? Everyone had seen them together. And it's not like he could pass it off as an accident either, considering Midnight had called him her sidekick out loud in front of everyone. There was only one conclusion that can be drawn from that. But despite the fact that his non-existent social life had, somehow, taken even further damage than before, he couldn't find it in himself to regret it. He had gotten to accompany a hero during their patrol, and she taught him so much about being a hero too. He had to make an entirely separate notebook when he got back specially made to compile all the things Midnight was going to teach him. Emphasis on future tense because she wanted to do it again. He couldn't believe how lucky he had gotten. First Midnight had saved him, then she told him he could become a hero, and now she's teaching him how? Izuku paused. Was Midnight his favorite hero now? It's not like All Might had done anything wrong, and he was still All Might, but All Might wasn't the hero going out of their way to mentor him, was he? Stepping through the school gates, the first thing Izuku could feel was the complete change in atmosphere from his appearance. The second thing was the glares he could tell that everyone was giving him. There were a bunch of students scattered about the front area, and all of them were looking his way. Fighting back a shiver from how eerily quiet it was, Izuku walked as quickly as he could towards the entrance to the main building. As expected, things weren't much better inside. In fact, he'd argue it was worse, even the teachers were looking at him. Was this really such a big deal to everyone? For the first time in his life, Izuku actually missed being ignored or dismissed like he usually was. How did Kaken handle having everyone's attention on him all the time like this? He froze in fear where he was in the middle of the hallway. Kaken! He was angry at him for talking to Midnight. What was he going to do after hearing about this? Izuku tried to take a calming breath, but it wasn't working very well. At least he didn't have many possessions to his name to hand out after Kaken murdered him in the middle of their classroom. Opening the door to said classroom, his eyes quickly scanned the room for anyone with blonde hair, and to his immense relief he couldn't see anyone. Temporarily he was safe. Ignoring how everyone was still looking at him quietly, he hurried to his desk and tried to make himself as small as possible. It took a few minutes for everyone else to get bored of looking at the cowering boy curled up at his desk, small murmurs of conversation beginning to start up to fill the silence. Lifting his head up, Izuku felt relief wash over his body now that his classmates were back to ignoring him. Opening his bag, he went to get his school supplies out of his bag. When he got to his notebooks, he carefully placed it on his desk before looking around the room again. Spotting the small group of girls by the window, he did his best to summon his confidence before moving over to them. Hey, Hanabira-san? He squeaked out, his voice as quiet as he could get to avoid drawing attention. Hanabira jolted and turned towards him, surprise written across her face. Her friends also turned his direction, although they looked far more unimpressed by his appearance. What is it, Deku? She answered, almost as uncomfortable as he was. I just, wanted to let you know that I got Midnight's autograph. He muttered out, and oh boy did the ground seem really interesting right about now. One of her friends scoffed, and all Hanabira uttered was a soft, oh. Why yeah. Despite how uncomfortable this conversation had become, he'd feel more awkward if he stopped now. And I remembered what you said about her yesterday, so I got a second for you too, if you want it. If he were looking up, he would have seen the look of shock on the girl's face. And maybe even a slight pink tinge on her cheeks if he looked closer. One of her friends made a gagging noise. Why would Hana-chan want anything from you? Yeah, she might end up catching something if you were touching it long enough. A different one added with a snort. W-I-dash. Do you even want it, Hana-chan? A third friend cut him off, directing everyone towards the flower girl. Hanabira seemed flustered at all the focus suddenly shifting to her. Rapidly, she looked between her friends and Izuku. Eventually, she turned her body a little bit, turning her back to Izuku. Thanks for offering Deku, but I don't want it. Was the best he could get out, scratching the back of his head. Sorry to bother you, Hanabira-san. Quickly, he turned and retreated back to his seat before he could make a bigger fool of himself than he already did. Doing his best to ignore the snickers and giggles coming from the rest of the classroom, he sat there wishing desperately for a hole to open up in the ground and swallow him. Opening his special notebook, he flipped to one of the later pages. Looking at the large, sprawling autograph written across it, he very slowly and carefully tore the page out. Gently, he folded the page so as not to crease over the writing, and when nobody was looking, he slipped the paper into Hanabira's bag on the desk next to him. Outside of the morning incidents, the day hadn't been as bad as he expected it to be. The teachers seemed more agitated than usual, often calling him out in the middle of class, but that could be for any reason really. It was probably a little too egotistical to think he was the cause of it. It was currently recess, and he was currently walking back to his class before the bell rung. Things never went well for him if he turned up even slightly late, so he always made sure to get there early, but not so early that he'd be there alone and get blamed for doing something else. Or at least, that was his plan until something caught onto his collar, yanking him backwards and into the bathroom he was walking past. Coughing from being suddenly strangled, he was unable to react when he was slammed into the wall, his head bouncing roughly off the hard tile. We need to talk, Deku. Dazed, his eyes attempted to focus on the narrowed and furious eyes of Bakugo. A part of his subconscious began to dissociate, already anticipating the beatdown he was about to receive. The hand around his collar jostled him a bit. Stop zoning out and listen to me, Deku. Shaking his head to regain his bearings, Izuku looked properly at Bakugo for the first time, and he instantly regretted it. While he had suspiciously kept his distance this morning, right now Bakugo looked positively feral with rage as he snarled at him, his left eye even twitching slightly. That's better. Bakugo growled out, leaning in closer. Do you know what the only good thing about this shitty school is, Deku? A fist slammed into the wall next to him. Izuku could hear the crackles of small explosions in his ear. I said listen, not talk. Clear. At Izuku's frantic nodding, Bakugo continued. The reason this worthless school is redeemable is because of how trash it is. When I start shooting up the hero rankings, people will see what lame school I went to and realize just how great I am rising above the usual trash that infects this place. Another growl tore through his throat. But that story doesn't work as well when some dumbass B-list hero shows up taking an interest in one of the students. Especially when that student is some worthless little Deku like you. People will start wondering if there's something wrong with the other extras at this school if you're somehow the one that draws interest. Izuku gulped as he took in what was being said. Was Kaken jealous that he had attracted Midnight's attention? Or was he just mad that someone was nice to him in general? Now normally, I would make you reflect on causing this mess until you were eating through a straw. The hand beside Izuku's head flexed. But knowing you, you'll go crying to your little hero friend, they'll throw a fit, and there goes my hero career. He tilted his head, eyes somehow narrowing even more. So instead I'll just wait. I'll wait for them to see for themselves how much of a waste of space you are, or for you to realize how pathetic you are and give up. Knowing you, it'll probably be the first option. And with that, he released his hold on the collar, and Izuku dropped down to the ground. So enjoy playing hero for now, Deku. Just know I'll be waiting for you when that hero dumps you like everyone else did. Bakugo finished, before stomping out of the bathroom. From his spot on the floor, Izuku watched the bathroom door swing closed. He clenched his fists as he reflected on everything Kaken had just said to him. I know she's only humoring me for a bit, Kaken. He whispered to himself, a stinging sensation rising in his eyes. But even still, The bell for the end of recess rang. Izuku did not return to class. Nemuri sighed as she gave another paper a marginal passing grade. Why can't students appreciate hero art history the way that they should? It's like they all forgot that they need to pass her subjects to graduate too. Maybe her mistake was assigning an essay as the task, something like a group presentation. Would have been drawn more interest. Plus, she wouldn't have to do as much grading, so it was win-win really. Flipping the paper onto the pile next to her, she slid the next essay over and already made a groan in resignation from reading the first sentence. She was definitely kicking herself now. Sitting in this chair all day and marking these terribly done papers was going to be the death of her. She'd need to find some sort of stress release this afternoon to make up for it. Maybe she could try asking her students if they wanted extra training? It'd certainly work as a form of petty revenge. She shook her head. That's probably not the attitude a teacher should have. Maybe she could try and find a villain instead. Although if she were to do that, she'd have to check to see if Izuku was available this afternoon. Nemuri smiled as her thoughts drifted to her unexpected little protégé. It had been a couple of weeks since she had started taking Izuku on patrols with her, and the two of them had gone out a handful of times since then. Thankfully, Izuku was a quick and more than eager to learn, unlike her students, and he was quickly picking up on the basic observation skills that she wanted him to learn prior to undergoing any serious training. Wistfully, she imagined what it would be like teaching Izuku over her current students. She's picked up by now that he was a bit of a hero nerd, so she hoped he'd share an appreciation for hero art history like her. Granted, knowing Izuku, he'd be too shy to actually speak up about it, but that was fine for now. He'd be swimming in confidence by the time she was through with him. What is it? An annoyed voice grunted out beside her, bringing her out of her mind. Turning towards the voice, she looked at a large yellow lump sprawled on the ground. What was that, Shoyuta? She responded, eager to distract herself with conversation instead of work. The lump suddenly came to life, wriggling and writhing about as it twisted around to face her. Eventually the familiar tired and annoyed face of Shoyuta Aizawa came into view, and Nemuri could already tell he was in one of those moods. Flopping around, he sat up and leaned his back against one of the nearby table legs. You've done nothing but sigh to yourself for the past 10 minutes. So I'm asking what you're sighing about. He let out a sigh of his own. I can't sleep with you making all this noise. Oh, are you interested in my life, Shoyuta? How sweet of you. She teased with a smirk. Shoyuta groaned in annoyance. Forget it. It's not worth it. She laughed. He was too easy. All right, calm down for a minute and I'll tell you. She turned her chair to face him, completely abandoning the paper grading. If you must know, I have an apprentice. She beamed. She'd been waiting for a chance to brag about Izuku to someone. He frowned in confusion. You? Have an apprentice? You? Yes. She laughed again. Surprised? Very. He deadpanned. So who is it? One of your second years? Nope. Actually, he's still only in middle school at the moment. You're mentoring a middle schooler? He let out another sigh. Do you even know how to teach a middle schooler? Hey, I teach here, don't I? She held back a snicker at the, "Oh God," Shoyuta muttered under his breath. "But if you're that concerned, feel free to come see him for yourself." "Pass." Shoyuta denied immediately. "Ah, come on Shoyuta. I think you'll really like him," she pleaded. "He's a thinker like you know. He does analyses of heroes and villains in his spare time." The frown on Shuta's face softened slightly into a more neutral, done with life face. "What kind of analysis?" Nemuri couldn't hold back the victorious smirk. "Got him." Reaching for her phone sitting on her desk, she quickly sent Izuku a message asking him to send a picture of his analysis on her. "I'll have him send a picture of one really quick. And if you think he has potential, or whatever it is you always go on about after reading what he's done, you have to meet with him." "No promises," he mumbled, closing his eyes. "I'll have a nap while waiting. You get back to work." Nemuri groaned. Fortunately, it only took about 10 minutes for Izuku to message her back, with a nice clear image of his notebook attached, as well as a request not to message him during class again. Sticking out her foot, she kicked Shoyuta awake, much to the man's annoyance. "Here, take a look." She smiled, shoving her phone right in his face. Shoyuta made a few small hums as he read over what was written there. While she was waiting, Nemuri hoped that the section written on her was one of the better ones. Maybe she should have asked Izuku to send his best one instead? Or maybe he might have had one on Eraserhead. She could imagine the look on his face reading a section about himself. "It's all right," was all he said after minutes of waiting. All right good or all right bad? It's definitely written by a middle schooler. Shoyuta started, fidgeting around in the sleeping bag as he worked with the zipper. The actual content itself was fine, but the notes are mostly unorganized, as if he were just writing everything he could think of. Additionally, the presentation tries to make it appear unbiased, but he constantly inputs his own thoughts. She felt a frown of her own grace her face. "So, you didn't like it?" Shoyuta climbed out of the sleeping bag. "Like I said, it's all right. Every flaw I just said is easily solved through a little coaching and experience. Once that happens, he'll likely be very good at it." He stretched out his shoulders and twisted his back. "So yes, there's potential there." "Yes." She cheered, fist pumping the air. "A deal's a deal, Shoyuta." She pointed at him. "Clear your schedule because I'm arranging a meeting." Shoyuta grimaced. "I never actually agreed to that." "I don't care." She fixed a knowing look at him. "If you refuse, I'll tell Hisashi about all this, and you know he'll be more persistent about it than I am." Shoyuta shuddered for a second, probably thinking about the death of his peace and quiet for the foreseeable future. He quickly relented. "Fine. But I pick the when and where." "Deal." Nemuri grinned. She couldn't wait to tell Izuku about this. When she originally agreed to let Shoyuta arrange the meeting with Izuku, she half expected him to pick some inconvenient time and place just to try and avoid having to do this at all. Or as some kind of cryptic test of Izuku's commitment that he likes to spring on his students so often. Fortunately, that wasn't. And that was why she was here now, in a small cafe on a Sunday afternoon, with a very happy tortoiseshell cat snuggled on her lap. "He's late." Turning to her friend, who was also swarmed with an army of cats around him, Nemuri internally remarked at how someone could somehow look both intensely annoyed and overwhelmingly happy at the same time. She rolled her eyes. "I told him 3:30, Shoyuta. It's only 3:18. The gruff man gave her an unimpressed glare. If he was serious, he'd have shown up early. "I only just got here myself. Why would you want him here before me?" "Oh," he hummed. "So it's something he learned from you." She sighed. "Stay strong, Nemuri. Don't get in an argument now." Taking her silence as a sign of defeat, Shoyuta went to take a victory sip from his cup of coffee. Having his fill, he affixed his gaze back to her. "You still haven't explained anything about this kid to me." Thankful for the topic change, she leaned forward on the table. "Well, what would you like to know first? You can start by explaining why you're mentoring a middle schooler all of a sudden." "Ah." She expected this question to come up, but she was dreading it because she wasn't certain of an answer. Izuku was sweet, kind-hearted, determined and a hard worker, But those traits didn't do much to separate him from any other hero hopeful, did it? A more cynical thought was that he even lacked a few traits, such as confidence or charisma. Not to mention the very obvious other aspect he was lacking. But there was just something about him that drew her in. It wasn't anything that she could explain easily, especially when that person was a grouch like Shoyuta. She may have used his notebook to draw interest, but the only way to draw his attention was for Izuku to do it himself, rather than anything she could say. She gave her fellow hero a teasing smirk, resting her chin on one of her hands. "You'll know when you meet him, Shoyuta. So no reason then." Now it was his turn to roll his eyes. Then explain something else. What's his quirk? And now it was time for the other big question, though she was prepared for this one. He's quirkless. If she had thought Shoyuta was annoyed before, his face shifted to genuine anger, his eyes flashing red for a brief moment. One of the cats nestled near him scurried away, as if it could sense what was about to happen. "You've got to be kidding me," he growled. "You want me to help you train a quirkless middle schooler? This might be the dumbest thing you've done yet. You said yourself he had potential, Shoyuta. I'm not letting you back out because of some stupid bias." She countered, anger also starting to flare. "I said his analysis had potential, which it still does." His voice was low, as he tried to keep himself from yelling out in public. "But as a hero?" He shook his head. "Completely illogical." "And why not?" She felt her nails dig into her palms from clenched fists. "There are plenty of heroes that don't have amazing quirks." "No, but they still have quirks." More cats began to leave their table. "And those quirks give them utility that he won't have. And before you list me, I take steps to mitigate my drawbacks." "And he can't do the same?" "Then where do you start?" "I take measures to protect my eyes and to fight mutant quirks. You have methods to counter things that interfere with your quirk. What weakness of his do you mitigate when he doesn't have any strengths to build a foundation on?" His face grew more tired than irritated as he continued. "That's what we're going to figure out while we train him." She yelled. "Don't write him off before you even meet him." He shook his head again, more so out of disappointment. "There's a difference between encouragement and enablement, Nemuri. You're letting positive feelings for this kid push you towards illogical decisions. And I could say that you're letting a narrow-minded viewpoint bias yourself before even meeting him." She huffed, crossing her arms. "Whatever. Just wait till he gets here. And you better not harass him." Shoyuta only grunted again in response, opting instead to play with one of the cats lazing next to him. Neither hero willing to be the one that broke the silence that had gripped the table. Until, 10 minutes later, Izuku walked through the door. Internally, she cringed at his choice of outfit. While the pants, jacket and bag slung over his shoulder were fine, a shirt that simply said, "T-shirt," on it was definitely not going to win any favors with her grumpy colleague. She'll have to work on his fashion sense. Izuku took a moment to look around, before finally making eye contact. Giving him a smile and wave, she beckoned him over to their table. Ducking his head, Izuku scurried over. Hello Midnight-san. I'm sorry I'm late, I had a bit of trouble getting here." He stuttered out, bowing. "It's no problem, Izuku. We only just got here too." She gave him a dismissive hand wave, pointedly ignoring the small coming from across the table. "And I suppose I should introduce you. Izuku, this is Shoyuta Aizawa, he's a fellow hero friend of mine." Izuku's eyes widened, as if he just remembered they weren't alone. "Ah." He bowed again. It's nice to meet you, sir." Shuta's face remained completely neutral as he waited for Izuku to dip his head back up to face him. Once he did, the man wordlessly nodded his head towards the empty chair. Getting the message, Izuku quickly scrambled into the seat. Once he settled in, Nemuri continued. "So, Izuku, I've been talking to Shoyuta about having him help you with your training." The kid froze in his seat. "What? No. There's no need to do that. I'm fine with everything you've been showing me, Midnight-san." "Nonsense." She laughed. "There's a lot of things you can learn from having a different teacher. Besides, if you only learn from me all the time, you really will end up becoming Midnight Mini." She teased with a wink, chuckling at the deep flush that rose on his face. Right, Shoyuta? As if he was waiting for a chance to speak, Shoyuta sat further upright, sharpening his gaze. Before I commit to anything, I want to ask you some questions first. Izuku gulped, before nodding. I'll get right to the point. You're quirkless. If Shoyuta noticed Izuku's posture tense, he didn't acknowledge it. So what I want to know is, what do you intend to do as a hero? Izuku looked pale at the sudden interrogation. I know it's a vague answer, but I've always wanted to be a hero to help people, to protect them and to dash. You're right. That it's too vague. Shoyuta shook his head. But it's also the wrong question. How do you intend to do those things? What if you encounter a powerful villain? What will you do in a disaster zone? You might be willing, but there's a difference between willpower and ability. To his credit, he didn't even flinch at the kick he received under the table. I'm more interested in what you think you can do to not be a liability. Izuku stuttered out aimlessly. The poor boy looked completely shell-shocked. Shoyuta! Nemuri chastised. What was the one thing I told you not to do? Shoyuta shrugged his shoulders. It's something that needed to be said. Better it be said now than later instead of coddling him. You dash. It's okay, Midnight-san. Izuku squeaked out. He ducked his head down to look at the table. He's not wrong. She felt her heart break slightly at how crestfallen he looked. All that work put into boosting his confidence over the weeks, seemingly crushed in an instant. Maybe she should have held off a bit before introducing him to Shoyuta. I am sorry, I don't really know how to answer the question. Shuta's impassive face morphed into another frown. Why not? It's just. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck. It's also kind of vague? The glare intensified. Explain. I mean, when you say disaster zone, the answer depends on what kind? Like, the actions you'd have to take in a flood would be different to what you'd have to do in an earthquake, you know? Same with the villain attack. What kind of villain is it? Are there any hostages or possible collateral damage? That kind of stuff. His face suddenly turned to alarm. Sorry. I'm rambling now. And I still haven't answered the question. The glare softened, replaced with a look of intrigue. He took a few moments to contemplate everything that was just said. Tell me everything you could do in response to a building collapse. Nemuri smiled and kept to herself as Izuku stuttered his way through an explanation. Almost immediately after, Shoyuta gave him a different scenario, then another and another. She petted the head of the cat snoozing on her head while she watched Izuku creep further and further out of his shell with each counter he gave to the interrogation. This conversation went on for over an hour. Which is why in that case, I would have rescue teams keep to the rear and prioritous areas where structural damage was most severe. He finished, pointing with his pen towards the diagram of downtown Tokyo he had scribbled into his notebook. Shoyuta made a grunt of acknowledgement. Now tell me what you would do if a villain appeared here. He asked, pointing to a street on the side of the map. In that case, splitting up between combat and rescue specialists would be too risky, so forming smaller teams with a mixture of both would be better. Combat heroes to distract and fight off the villains, and rescue to focus on civilians. This time he hummed, folding his arms. I agree. Although this plan also fails if the villains are more aggressive or destructive. Izuku scratched his head. In that case, the priority would have to be the villains over the civilians, as much as I don't want to say that. He bit his lip in thought for a second. There is another contingency, though. I'm listening. Well, it's this building here. He pointed to a circle drawn on the map. That's my tower. All Might. Izuku nodded. Exactly. I know relying on All Might may not be the answer you'd like, but a hypothetical villain attack in this area would most likely be handled by him. Probably. Coming up with a plan just in case the man is running off on a media tour or something is wise, though. Izuku didn't say anything, only averting his eyes in response. Leaning back in his seat, Shoyuta sighed. All right, I think I've heard enough. Izuku's eyes quickly darted back. Oh. The hero's jaw clenched, making it a point to not look at the smug grin across the table from him. You have some potential, I suppose. Really? The corners of his mouth twitched upwards slightly. Looks like you passed, kiddo. Namuri finally spoke up, giving him a smile. For now, yes. Taking the pen laying on the table, he began to write in the notebook. Midnight's been taking you on patrols, but you haven't done any physical training. Expect a message from me telling you a time and place for combat training. See combat training? Already? But Midnight-sen said dash. I'm aware of what she said, but it's better to get started sooner rather than later. My quirk doesn't assist me with fighting either, so I'd be more suited to training you in that aspect. Izuku tilted his head in curiosity. It doesn't? No. My quirk only disables other quirks, so I have to rely on my own ability in a fight. Izuku jolted straight up, as if he was just struck by lightning. Your Eraserhead. Namuri laughed at the look of mixed surprise and confusion that went across Shuta's face. I'm surprised it took you so long to realize, Izuku. Yep, grumpy old Shoyuta is the Erasure hero himself. He grunted. If I was easy to recognize, it would make my job more difficult. Whoa, Izuku whispered to himself, muttering something else under his breath. Are you really okay with teaching me, Eraserhead-sen? If I wasn't, I wouldn't be doing it. He waved off. And just, Aizawa, is fine. We're both doing this because we think you can do it, Izuku. Namuri added, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Though I'll warn you, Shuta's a lot meaner than I am. Oh, that's fine. The boy waved his hands around. I'm really just grateful that you two are doing this for someone like me. Someone like him? Squeezing his shoulder, she brought his focus onto her. What do you mean by that, Izuku? He seemed to panic at that question, as his arms started waving even faster. I'm quirkless, so I'm not usually dash. Your lack of quirk gives you a disadvantage, but it's not impossible to overcome it. Show you to cut him off. Although if you keep thinking negatively of yourself like that, you never will. Izuku seemed to take some time to absorb that advice, almost shutting down completely from getting lost in his thoughts. Now then, it's getting late, kid. You should get home soon. Looking out the window, she could see the beginning of sunset stretching across the horizon. Had they really been here that long? Good point. I don't want you going home in the dark, Izuku. Don't worry, I'll be fine. Assured, standing up quickly, before bowing to the two of them again. Thank you so much for everything. She smiled. Again, you don't need to bow for everything, Izuku. I'm glad to help. She started waving him off. Now get going. I'll call you to join me again in a few days. Right, thank you, Midnight-san. Aizawa-san. He started to bow again, but caught himself. No problem, kid. Shoyuta added. Smiling, Izuku began to pack his things away, before pausing as he reached his notebook. Can I ask for one more thing? What is it, Izuku? Can you please sign my notebook, Eraserhead? Once Izuku had left, she turned to face Shoyuta again. What did I tell you? You'd know what I saw when you met him. She laughed to herself. Plus, it turns out you actually have a fan. Shoyuta hummed, ignoring that last jab. He's certainly better than I gave him credit for. He contemplated for a moment. You're planning on getting him into UA, right? She nodded. Yep, that's the plan at least. Her colleague let out another noise. Originally, I was going to ask why you weren't going to just recommend him, but his quirklessness makes that almost impossible. He'd do fine in the written test and interview, but unless the recommended students that year are terrible, his practical score will kill any chance of passing. She sighed. Yeah, I know that. It sounded wrong as a teacher to root for students to do badly, but that would be his only chance of getting in through that path. And there were plenty of mediocre recommendations every year. How amazing could the ones that year be? He should apply for the support course. Now that drew her out of her thoughts. What? Shoyuta crossed his arms again. You heard me. His skill set is much more suited for the support course. Everything he said and did today told me that he'd make an excellent navigator, analyst, and tactician. A spark of anger shot through her. Was he testing him for the support course this whole time? But that's not the course he's aiming for, Shoyuta. He shook his head. He's not getting into the hero course. The spark was now a steadily growing flame. Don't tell me that everything you just said to him was a lie, or I swear to God dash. He's in his first year of middle school, right? He waited for her to confirm before he continued. Then you should know what part of the rotation the entrance exam will be up to when he applies to UA. It took her a moment to realize what he was referring to. The robots. Exactly. He huffed. It doesn't matter how well we train him, he's not going to be able to punch through robots as well as others his age can going wild with their quirks. Therefore, his best options are support, management, and general studies. And of those options, he'd be best in support. I'm not going to tell him to give up and go to the support course, Shoyuta. I didn't say to give up. He countered. He doesn't need to become a hero immediately, he'll be able to get a license after he graduates. Why would he need to wait? He can transfer into the hero course. Because to transfer, he'll have to place highly in the sports festival. Against students that have undergone quirk training. He gave her a look. Your objective is to get him a hero license, not to get him in the hero course specifically, remember? While she couldn't deny everything he had said to be at the very least partially true, something about it didn't sit right with her. You said yourself that overcoming his disadvantage wasn't impossible. She rested her chin on her hand. Wouldn't telling him to aim for a different course entirely be telling him to admit defeat? Shoyuta held eye contact with her. Perhaps. Well, in that case, then I'll continue to push him towards the hero course. She stood up and made to leave. And besides, that entrance exam isn't impossible to pass with an ineffective quirk. Oh. Yep. She grinned. After all, you might not have passed, but I did. He got home a little bit after it officially became nighttime, the streetlights turning on when he was a few blocks away. While he might not have specifically had a curfew, he never liked being out too long into the evening. Showing up late at night was definitely something that would draw too much attention to himself. He never liked having to answer questions. Opening the door, he quickly poked his head through the doorway, and seeing nobody in the common room, quickly scurried inside. He got about halfway through the room and towards the staircase when someone cleared their throat behind him, scaring the heck out of him. Turning around, he was suddenly face to face with his guardian and owner of the orphanage, Ryuji Sanai. Sanai-sen. I didn't see you when I came in. Izuku squeaked out in greeting. The man didn't return the greeting, instead opting to simply stare at Izuku. You're home late. He drawled. Again. Izuku laughed awkwardly. Sorry. I never planned to do it, it just kinda happens. Sanai mused. Just try not to make it a habit. I'd rather you didn't get attacked or something. Right, sir? The boy nodded in response. After which, he waited patiently for Sanai to dismiss him. And waited. And waited. If that's all, I'll be going now. I've heard from some people in the area that you've been hanging around a hero recently. Ah! He exclaimed. He should have seen something like this coming, really. He's gone on enough patrols with Midnight now that people were starting to recognize him even when he was on his own. Why yeah, she's been offering to show me what it's like being a hero. Sanai made another non-committal hum. Well, just be careful. Last time you were hanging around a hero, I got a call from the hospital. Izuku looked at the ground in embarrassment. Yes, sir. Okay, now get to bed, it's a school night. Sanai said, dismissing him. Taking the cue to leave, Izuku quickly dashed away for his room. Once in his room, he breathed a sigh of relief at finally being able to rest for the day. Today was exhausting. When Midnight messaged him about meeting up on the weekend, he wished she would have added in that he was also going to be interrogated by Eraserhead of all people too. Still, he had somehow managed to impress the hero at some point, considering that he agreed to help train him as well. A feat that he still couldn't quite believe. He thought it was crazy having one hero mentor him, but now he has two? Truly, it was a miracle. Dropping his bag on his desk next to his computer, he carelessly turned to and flopped onto his. Why was Midnight doing all of this for him? She didn't still feel like she owed him for the hospital trip at this point, right? He hoped not. He couldn't possibly have asked for anything more than what she's already given him. He looked to the side, his gaze fixing to his old All Might action figure he had sitting on his desk. Could he really become a hero? Sure, it was always his dream, but it always seemed so unattainable. But now, with people actually helping and supporting him, for the first time in his life, he felt that it might not actually that impossible of a dream. Exhaustion took over and he fell asleep a few minutes later, thinking about how lucky he was to be given this chance. It took a week for Eraserhead to finally message him back, with the response only giving him a time and address, which ended up being a park in a nearby district. "Thank you again for training me, Eraserhead-san," Izuku said, giving a minute bow out of instinct. "I already told you to just call me Aizawa." Eraser grumbled, stretching out his neck. "Then thank you, Aizawa-san." "Right." Aizawa took a few paces forward into a clearing. "Now, since you're still only 12, Midnight has instructed me not to get too intense with these exercises. In that case, for these first few sessions, we'll focus on basic fitness and things such as the correct way to fall and take hits. Don't worry, I won't actually hit you." Izuku breathed an internal sigh of relief. He's used to taking hits, but something told him taking a hit from a professional hero would be a little worse than most of the stuff he was used to. Though there was one thing he should probably mention. Is there a problem? No. It's just, I'm actually 13 now," he said sheepishly. Should he have said that? Was it even relevant? Aizawa raised an eyebrow. "You are? Is Midnight aware of this?" "No." "I'll let her know then. Next time, let one of us know about things like that." "You understood, sir." Aizawa mumbled something under his breath in response, before beckoning him over. "Well, despite that news, we'll stick to today's plan. I'll add on basic fighting techniques at the end of each session starting with the next one." After that, Izuku spent the next few hours running a gauntlet that Aizawa had set out for him. Running sprints, push-ups, sit-ups, jumps, stretches. Each time he was finished with whatever task given to him, Aizawa would record the results and keep them for reference. Once he was finally done with all of them, the hero instructed him the proper way to position his body when falling, as well as what to do to stay safe or keep momentum when falling from a high place. By the time he was done, he was completely wiped out. "That wasn't bad," Aizawa said, standing over his exhausted body. "Your results definitely have room for improvement, but I expected you to quit or ask for a break at some point, and you didn't. So well done." Thank you," he panted out between breaths. "Keep in mind that eventually something like this should be just a warm-up. It'll get easier with time," he said, looking at his phone. "It's getting late, you should get ready to go before your legs start to give out on you. Spend tomorrow recovering." "Alright," Izuku gasped, leaning on a nearby tree to stand up. "Unless I message you otherwise, meet up here again same time next week. Message me when you get home so I know you're safe." "Okay," he said, slinging his bag over his shoulder. He was definitely going to feel this tomorrow. "I know you said not to say it, but thank you for doing this, Aizawa-san." Aizawa seemed to just look at him for a few moments, before nodding. "No problem, kid. As long as you don't slack off, I'm happy to." He nudged his head sideways. "Now get going." "Yeah." Izuku nodded in return, before heading out of the park. He didn't see the look Aizawa gave him from his spot where he left him, before he pulled out his phone to send a message. Namuri had been anticipating the Monday morning following Izuku's first training session with Shoyuta ever since the little date they had at the cafe the other day. She had even arrived at work early for a change. She had been waiting at her desk in the teacher's office for nearly half an hour now, her eyes laser-focused on the door waiting for her colleague to arrive. Originally, she had planned for just a standard run-of-the-mill questioning session, but after the text he had sent her that afternoon it had been upgraded to a full-on interrogation. "We need to talk about this kid we're training." Now, a pessimist would think that a message like this would be a sign of something ominous, especially since Shoyuta declined to extrapolate when she asked for further details. But she was an expert in communicating with the man and knew that serious, short and direct sentences was the only way he knew how to interact with people. For all she knew, Izuku blew him away so much that he wanted to offer her a formal apology for ever doubting her talent evaluation skills. Well, She wasn't that optimistic. But still, if it were something bad, he would have said something. She sat there waiting for a full hour when the door finally moved and Shoyuta shuffled his way in, posture slouched and with a sleeping bag tucked under his arm. "Finally!" she shouted across the empty room, and judging by how he jumped, it seemed that he hadn't noticed her yet. "I've been waiting for ages, Shoyuta. It's rude to keep a girl waiting." Shoyuta turned to face her, his eyes showing nothing but annoyance. "You're here early." "Of course I am. You think you can send a message like that and not explain it?" Shoyuta paused to take a deep breath, before marching over to his desk with a grumble. Throwing his sleeping bag on the table, he directed his gaze at Namuri and got straight to the point. "How much do you know about that kid you're training?" She paused. That wasn't what she expected him to say next. "Is there something wrong with him?" "Humor me." Namuri thought about the question for a moment. "Well, where do you want me to start? His name's Izuku, he's an orphan, quirkless, 12 years old dash." "Wrong." Shoyuta cut her off. "He's 13. The interruption brought a concerned frown. Had Izuku lied to her? Wait, that shouldn't even matter. She had read his file back at the hospital. "Are you sure?" "Certain. He told me himself." "Then why didn't he?" "Tell you?" He settled into his chair. Apparently, he didn't think it was relevant. In fact, he was worried I'd get mad at him for correcting me. The concern had rapidly swelled into worry. "But why wouldn't he dash? It'll make sense in a bit." "Continue." Shoyuta pushed, leaning forwards. "Talk about his personality." "All right." "His personality?" "He's shy and introverted. He lacks confidence, but makes up for it in determination and perseverance." Shoyuta nodded, an unspoken signal to continue. "And his people skills need work. When he's on patrol with me, he tries to keep to the side, and when he has a concern he uses me as an in-between instead of talking to someone directly." This seemed to satisfy her friend, as he raised his hand to stop her. "I agree," he stated. "Now, which of those traits seems like it doesn't belong?" She was totally lost as to what kind of point Shoyuta was trying to make here. What doesn't belong? Pretty much everything she said makes sense for someone quiet that keeps to themselves. If she had to pick an outlier, she supposed it'd have to be the determination part? It'd make sense. Every now and then he'd almost turn into a different person whenever he became absorbed into his work or a task given to him. That's the one. Shoyuta rubbed the bridge of his nose. Which leads to the question of why that trait is there. "I have a different question, actually." She sighed. "Where are you going with this, Shoyuta? You're questioning why an anxious kid is showing self-improvement." He shook his head. "The opposite, actually. Flip your thinking around. What I'm asking is, why does this kid show so many negative traits?" Her expression fell even further at that question. A dark feeling started to creep into her stomach. Shoyuta took her silence as a cue to continue. "You've heard him sometimes mutter or speak under his breath, right?" She nodded. "Only a few times. I stopped trying to listen to them after seeing how embarrassed he would get." "Do you remember what he said?" Namuri racked her brain. "It was during one of our early patrols." She recalled. "I think he got worried I gave him a trick question?" Shoyuta gave a hum in thought. "Would you like to know what he said to himself during our training session?" She gulped and braced herself before nodding. "When I told him that I wouldn't hit him in training, he commented about being used to taking hits from people." The dark feeling from before swept through her whole body, bringing with it a wave of nausea. "That wasn't the only thing he said." Shoyuta added. "I mentioned this before, but he also nearly worked himself into a panic every time he thought he upset me." Namuri rubbed her temples in an attempt to stifle the upcoming migraine. "Shoyuta." She groaned. "Please don't tell me that Izuku is an abuse victim." She wasn't sure if it was a mercy that he took a few moments to respond. "Obviously, I don't have any concrete evidence of such." She heard him let out an annoyed sigh. "But I'm willing to assume that the majority of his negative traits are learned, not natural." Namuri let out another pained noise. "I can't believe I missed all of this." Was she really that oblivious? Or did she just ignore all of the red flags? Shoyuta noticed all these things from meeting him twice. In your defense, he's very good at hiding it. Shoyuta said in an ineffective attempt to reassure her. I didn't make the connection during our first meeting at the cafe until he slipped up at the end. After that it all made sense. Slip up? She wondered for a second what he could have meant when it struck her. There was one thing Izuku had said that concerned her, but the conversation had moved so quickly that she didn't dwell on it. I'm really just grateful that you two are doing this for someone like me. Thinking on it now, it's a textbook example of a comment a person with low self-worth would make. And thinking back even further to their original meeting at the hospital, he had tried so adamantly to put himself down in front of her. It wasn't until she asked him about becoming a hero that he had finally done anything near opening up to her. At the time she had thought he was some mixture of shy, embarrassed, or still partially in shock from the attack, but had he actually been expecting her to berate him instead? The hospital staff had certainly been open about their feelings on him after all. Oh God. She really hoped their conversation wasn't the first time he had ever had a positive interaction with someone else. Before we start ruing over what we missed, we should focus on what to do next. Shuda's voice again dragged her focus away from the negative thoughts. The heroine shook her head to regain control. You're right. Her voice wavered slightly. We should work on collecting evidence. And afterwards, she can start kicking herself. Exactly. Shoyuta hummed. You've known him the longest. Has he ever said anything about home or school? No, never. She brought a hand to her chin. In fact, thinking about it, I don't think he's ever mentioned anybody in his personal life. I did visit his school once, though. And? Another shake of her head. I didn't stay for long, but he was alone when I saw him. And he seemed flustered when I called out to him, but I assumed that was surprise. Shoyuta paused in thought. What about his home life? That, I don't know about. Her eyes widened, a sudden memory coming to her. Actually, later that day I walked him home, and he was adamant about refusing to let me visit his home. That seemed to draw his attention. Then we should investigate there first. There might be something he's been hiding from you there. You think he's being abused at home? The way quirkless people are treated, I'd be more surprised if he wasn't. Shoyuta sighed. I also suspect he's being bullied at school, but we should tackle this one at a time. Namuri clenched her fists. We'll split this up. I'll take the orphanage, you start investigating the school. Shoyuta nodded in agreement, but the sinking feeling never left her for the rest of the day. She hoped that somehow, against all the odds, that they were wrong. She didn't expect Nedzu to be so accommodating when she had charged into his office demanding to have the next couple of days off for an investigation, but it seemed that word had already somehow reached the principal before she had arrived. She had barely finished explaining her intentions when he had cheerfully called out, approved, and wished her good luck. She preferred to think that Shoyuta had already given advanced notice, rather than thinking their conversations were being listened in on. And this is how. She ended up in casual clothes on a Tuesday morning, headed straight for the Muzutafu orphanage with so much purpose that she was scaring other pedestrians on the sidewalk. When doing preliminary research last night, she learned that she had actually met someone from the orphanage before. The owner, a man named Ryuji Sanai, was the person that collected Izuku from the hospital. She didn't talk much with the man as he seemed eager to leave, only sparing her a brief thanks for looking after Izuku before leaving. This presented a small problem, because if Shuda's guess was right and something was suspicious about the place, then arriving there as the hero midnight, they'd be able to link it back towards Izuku. Obviously, she didn't want that to happen, so she needed to go undercover for this one. Today, she wasn't the R-rated hero midnight, but Namuri Kayama, curious single woman looking to adopt. It was times like this she was glad she kept her private persona mostly unknown, since it made it easier to go undercover. Wearing a loose-fitting off-shoulder sweater with jeans and her hair tied back in a single large braid, she was fairly confident that she wouldn't be associated with her more pronounced DMNTRX persona. Arriving at the building, she first surveyed the outside before going in. As far as she could tell, everything looked fine at least. Research told her that the place was originally a hotel that had been repurposed for this purpose nearly 20 years ago, but the building looked well upkept. A far cry from old rundown shack that she was imagining thanks to years of absorbing old-era movies that featured orphanages. Deciding not to loiter outside any longer for fear of someone getting suspicious of what she was doing, she entered inside to the main common area. It was quiet when she entered, which was likely due to most of the occupants being out at school or work at this time of day. Scanning the room, it also seemed well furnished, with several couches and seating areas across the space, as well as an adjacent large dining room and kitchen off to the side. Next to the door was an unoccupied counter which seemed to be used for reception. Resisting the urge to snoop about while she was alone, Nemuri leaned against the counter and gazed at a wall of photographs that was behind the counter. Izuku's not in any of these. She wasn't sure how many kids were staying here, so it was hard to determine if these photos were specifically excluding Izuku, but it was a striking detail. Outings, game nights and parties featuring a bunch of smiling kids and teenagers were plastered everywhere, but not of the one she was worried about. "Oh!" A voice called out haphazardly, pulling her thoughts away from the wall. "I thought I heard the door." Turning to follow the voice, she found the owner himself standing at the bottom of the staircase leading up. Scanning his eyes for a moment, it didn't seem like he had recognized her at all. She could thank her flawless disguise for that one. She cleared her throat in preparation. "All right, act natural." She put on a beaming smile. "Hello. I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Nailed it." Sanai furrowed his brow for a moment before his face returned to neutral. "Not really." He took a deep breath, before walking over to the other side of the counter and taking a seat. "Can I help you with something?" The man's nonchalant attitude wasn't winning him any favors, but she hoped that was just a bad first impression. "Yes, I'd like to talk to you about adopting one of your kids." He raised an eyebrow. "You're adopting?" "That's the plan at least." "Oh, well, that's nice." Nemuri was almost impressed with how passive he could sound while speaking. "None of the kids are here right now, but we have a directory complete with entries on all of them, if you'd like to take a look at it." He turned around, reaching for a large binder on a shelf behind him. This was her chance. Actually, I already have an idea of who I'd like to adopt." Sanai stopped, glancing back at her. "You do?" "Yes." She leaned forward on the counter. "There's a boy named Izuku here, right?" Now that got his attention, genuine shock freezing his face as he started at her. "You're interested in Izuku?" He swiveled back in his chair. "Green hair? That Izuku?" "That's the one." Her eyes focused on as much detail as possible, waiting to see what his response would be when talking about Izuku. Would it be anger? Annoyance like the people at the hospital? Something else? Sanai's entire body seemingly deflated as he let out a long sigh. "Thank you." That wasn't the reaction she expected. Was he trying to get rid of him? "I'm sorry. I was worried that he'd never get adopted." The man threw his head back in relief. "I'm glad that it finally happened." It was at this point that she had the feeling that Sanai wasn't the kind of person she thought he was. "What do you mean? Why wouldn't he be adopted?" Sanai dipped his head back down and gave her a searching glance. She wasn't sure if he found what he was looking for before he stood back up and shuffled towards the dining room. "Please follow me. I assume that if you're asking about Izuku, you know that he's quirkless?" Sanai asked as he slid a mug of what looks to be hot chocolate on the desk in front of her. "Of course." She picked up the mug, nursing it in her hands slightly. "Is there a problem with that?" "With me? With most people? Yeah, it's usually a deal breaker." He took a sip from his own drink, a long forked tongue darting out to lick his lips when he was done. "I suppose I should explain. Most kids that are here under my care are here for one of two reasons. The first is that something happened to their parents or guardians, which is the nice reason." Nemuri frowned. "That was the nice reason? And the other one?" Sanai leaned his elbows onto the table. "The other is that their families dumped them because of their quirks, or in Izuku's case, lack of quirk." A wave of disgust and anger overcame her. "They can do that?" The man shook his head. "Legally, but," he glanced to the side. "I've seen enough cases to know what would happen if I refused to take those kids from them." "Like what?" He glared at her. In good cases, they get dumped on the street somewhere and end up here anyway. In bad cases, they sell them to someone willing to take them, no questions asked. Or worse. She placed her mug down on the table from fear of shattering it. Which one was Izuku? The second one. He rubbed his neck. But, think it was around 8 years ago? Some woman who was definitely his mother brought him to me. Practically begged me to take him from her. He looked down at the table. Kid couldn't have been much older than 4 at the time. That would have been right after learning he was quirkless, I bet. And you accepted? Definitely. I could tell from one conversation that woman was desperate, and I thought he'd be safer with me. I don't know what her reasoning was, but she needed someone to take him immediately. Another sip. Offered a ton of money to take him, too. And you took it? As a hero, she should probably keep track of what kind of deals were going on here. Like I said before, I knew what would happen if I denied her. I still have that money too. I use it to buy stuff for him when he asks me to. She hates that the sentimental part of her was willing to overlook all of this. And he's been here ever since? He hummed in confirmation. Poor kid was devastated for months when he realized what had happened to him. Eventually he got better, I suppose, but I've never seen him open up to anyone here. So he wasn't purposefully hiding things from me or Shoyuta, that's just how he is. Still, if I ever meet his mother, she better hope there's no witnesses around. And he's been here ever since that day? Sadly, the kids here that lose their parents have a chance of getting picked up depending on their quirk, but the other group? He shook his head. They have to get incredibly lucky for someone to look past their issue. For Izuku, a miracle would be an understatement. He's had 5 inquiries in the past, and all of them changed their minds after hearing he was quirkless. Nemuri felt her nails digging into her palms from how tight her fists were. What was wrong with these people? Did a quirk really matter that much? Could they really not look past and see what a sweet, bright and intelligent boy Izuku was? Though I guess that miracle actually happened, huh? Sanai said, a small smile on his tired face. You're adopting him, right? He tilted his head. You came here to ask about that, didn't you? Oh, she did say that, didn't she? Aye. Sanai raised an eyebrow. You are adopting him, yeah? Am I adopting him? Her mind was completely panicking now, and if she had the benefit of clarity she would have commented that maybe her planned cover story had a few flaws. She couldn't possibly adopt him. She didn't know the first thing about being a parent. Though there was a second voice in her head, a voice that was slowly growing louder telling her that maybe she should. Maybe this was secretly Sanai's plan, to give her the full story so she would feel too guilty to possibly say no. If so, it certainly worked. She wished the absolute best for Izuku, but would him living with her really be what was best for him? She tried her best to think this through. First of all, the fact she was even considering this was the peak of her own impulsive thoughts. If Shoyuta was here, he'd berate her for being completely irrational. Second, she'd never been a parent and never really planned on it either. Would she even be able to handle it? Sure, she taught high school students, but there's a difference between teaching one and raising one. Third, there's a chance Izuku wouldn't even want this, regardless of what she decided. On the flip side, the thought of raising and help Izuku grow up herself was very tempting to her. Is this what they call maternal instinct? And the extended time spent together would help him with both his hero training and regaining self-confidence. Not only that, but she could be sure that by taking him under her wing she could get him out from whatever abusive situation he was in. And finally, after hearing everything that he's been though, both from Sanai and from what she and Shoyuta had assumed, the boy deserved to be loved. Which she guessed lead to the next question. Does she love Izuku? She thought back to that moment in the hospital room when she told him being quirkless didn't matter. To those days spent on patrol with him, watching him grow more comfortable around her. To how proud she was when he won Shuta's approval. How angry and upset she was when she found out he might be being abused as well as his past. Miss? Sanai's voice called out, waving his hand around her face. After coming this far, did she really have any right to say she didn't? Yeah. She smiled. I'll still be adopting him. Shoyuta could chastise her for this later as much as he wanted to. She didn't care. Izuku let out a yawn as he rounded the corner back home. He really needed to stop pulling so many all-nighters and take a nap, but he couldn't help it. If he was going to keep proving himself to Midnight and Eraserhead, then he couldn't afford to let himself relax. Eraserhead himself had even said that he'd drop him if he slacked off. If he wasted time, he'd fall behind and his hero dream would be over. Midnight hadn't called on him today, so he was back home earlier than usual. He could thank Kaken for that at least. Ever since their conversation a few weeks ago, he hadn't been harassed by anyone at school anymore. In fact, it was pretty much the opposite of what he was used to. Instead of needing to avoid people all day from fear of getting attacked, everyone had started essentially ghosting him. Even the teachers had stopped acknowledging him in class. He couldn't deny, it was strange at first going from school punching bag to completely invisible, but he preferred it this way. It was better than being hit after all, and nobody really said anything nice to him anyway. Creaking open the door, he peeked his head in to glance around the common area. Off to the side by one of the couches, he could see Sanae-san hunched over a table with a stack of paperwork, sitting beside a woman that he hadn't seen around before. At least he thought that. He could only see the back of her head. Her hair seemed familiar. Sanae glanced to the door, and did a double take when they made eye contact. "Ah, Izuku. Good timing." He waved him over. "Come here for a second." Something in his gut told him to be wary of what was about to happen. Still, he listened and shuffled across the room. "This woman here is interested in adopting you, Izuku." "Ha! Ha! Did he hear that right? Adopted? Are you sure?" The woman laughed. "Trust me, Izuku. I'm very sure." He froze. He knew that voice. He darted around to face her, and sure enough, he met eyes with his mentor, and Midnight-san. Behind him, he heard Sanae mumble something about not knowing she was a hero. "What are you what?" Midnight seemed amused by his stunned state. "You heard Sanae-kun. If you're okay with it, I'd love to have you come live with me." Izuku was sure that if his jaw was any lower, it'd be on the floor. Is this what it was like to shut down? But why? His voice was shaking. "I don't understand." Midnight hummed, before crossing her arms. "Well, let me put it this way. I'm so proud of how far you've come already, and I want to officially be more than just your mentor." He was speechless. She was proud of him? But he hadn't even done anything yet. He was barely good enough to be worth training, let alone be good enough to accept as family. A stinging feeling began to build up behind his eyes. "I don't." He hiccuped. "Why are you doing all of this for me? There are so many other, better choices." Midnight must have been able to tell where his thoughts were going, because she was quickly upon him, placing a hand on his cheek and lifting his head up to face her. "I'm not doing this out of pity, Izuku." A thumb stroked his cheek. "I'm doing this because you're a smart, special young man. And succeed or fail at being a hero, I want to be a part of your life." She gave him a soft smile. "So what do you say? Are you fine with being family with me?" Izuku was well and truly sobbing at this point. Lunging forward, he wrapped his arms around and clung to the hero. "Thank you." He mumbled into her. "I don't know what I did to deserve it, but thank you so much." He felt Midnight's arms encircle him back, one of her hands resting on his head as she stroked his hair. "You deserved it by being you, Izuku." She whispered into his ear. He didn't say anything back. He didn't know what to say. Instead, he just cried harder and tightened his arms, hoping beyond hope that what was happening was real. He had truly been blessed by a miracle. He could hear Sanae say something and Midnight respond to him, but he was too far gone to care. Finally, someone had accepted him. It never occurred to Izuku before just how few things he owned until he had to organize it all. Most of his entire life, able to be crammed into just 4 small boxes. And of those boxes, 2 were reserved with only his clothes, and a third was just for his books and notebooks. His small computer and knickknacks like his few bits of hero merch and old All Might figure the only other belongings that were coming with him to his new home. His new home. He still wasn't sure if he could fully comprehend how crazy a sentence that was. He had been adopted by a hero. A hero that was mentoring him to also become a hero. How lucky could he get? He'd barely had any sleep since he learned the news. A small part of him was terrified that this was all some elaborate dream that he'd wake up from if he ever took the time to close his eyes. A knock on his door brought him out of his thoughts. Turning around, his eyes met with Sanai's, who was standing there in the doorway. "You all done?" he asked, breaking eye contact to glance around the room. Following them, Izuku took in the bare walls and otherwise empty room. Not that he had ever put many things up around his room, but it certainly looked more barren than it used to. Izuku felt a little sentimental for the place. He had lived in this room ever since the day he arrived, after all. Was all he got out, looking away awkwardly. "Well, that's good." Sanai leaned onto the doorframe. "Because there's a very demanding hero downstairs who wants you to hurry up." "I'm sorry. That wasn't good. What if she got sick of waiting? What if him being slow made her have second thoughts? What if he wasn't good enough? What about?" Sanai let out an amused exhale, bouncing off the doorway and into the room. "Relax, kid. She's more excited than impatient." Izuku couldn't help the relieved sigh that he let out. "Oh, all right. Besides, it looks like you're done anyway, so there's no point panicking." He walked over to one of the boxes and crouched down. "I'll help you move these out." "Why, you don't have to do that, Sanai-san." He moved over to take the box from the man. "I can do it by myself." Sanai lifted the box up and carried it at a height slightly too tall for Izuku to take it from his hands. "Probably. But I want to help you. It's the last time you'll be here after all." He paused in thought for a second. "At least, it better be. Tell her to stay safe, yeah?" Izuku wasn't sure if he was meant to laugh at that or not. He settled on a very forced half-chuckle. "Yeah, I'll do that." Sanai seemed to inspect him for a moment, before letting out a chuckle of his own. "I'm joking." Izuku laughed awkwardly again, before shuffling over to pick up a different box. Behind him, he heard a sigh, before Sanai spoke again. "I'm proud of you." Izuku whipped his head around, staring wide-eyed. Did Sanai-san really just say that? Really? Sanai smiled at him. "You heard me. I'm glad you found someone that can appreciate you." Oh. His face started feeling hot. What was with all the compliments everyone had been giving him lately? The older man nodded, giving an appreciative hum. "She's good for you too." He tilted his head back. "You may not have noticed it, but you've been happier ever since that trip to the hospital. At first I thought it was just because you got to talk to a hero one-on-one, but after I heard about you hanging around her I knew better." Izuku paused. Was that true? He never really felt like he was acting that differently in his day-to-day life, but he supposed it would make sense considering how large of an increase there had been of positive memories made in the months since he had first met Midnight in that hospital room. He was jarred out of his head again when Sanai nudged his shoulder with his elbow on the way out the door. "Let's go." "Why, yeah." He took a second to work up his courage. He hesitated. "Thank you for taking care of me all these years, Sanai-san." He gave an attempted bow over the box. Sanai stopped to look at him, before letting out a small noise of amusement. "It's just my job, kid." He motioned his head out the doorway. "Now come on, before we actually do keep her waiting." "All right." Readjusting his grip on the box, he trudged after his now former guardian. "All right, here we are. 8th floor." Midnight cheered, stopping at a door by the end of the hallway. She twirled around to face Izuku with a beaming grin. "End of the hall, so it's easy to remember too." "See, cool." Izuku struggled out, barely peeking his head above the pile of boxes he was carrying. He had never been so thankful for an elevator before. He heard Midnight shuffle around for a moment before the sound of keys fiddling with a lock replaced it. "Now, one more thing before we go in there." Midnight's voice suddenly turning serious. "I haven't told my roommate about you moving in, so be on your best behavior tonight." And cruelly, before Izuku had a chance to properly absorb the new information, she opened the door and ushered him inside. Izuku was panicking. Midnight had a roommate? Was it someone he knew? Was it another hero? It couldn't have been Eraserhead, or she would have said so. Looking around the apartment, he didn't see anyone in the immediate area. Izuku didn't know much about interior design, but the best way he could describe the apartment was modern. The living room, dining room, and kitchen were all part of one large area, with an island sectioning off the kitchen from the rest. The furniture all looked fairly unused, but that was understandable considering that there probably wasn't much downtime in the life of a hero. On the walls were several framed pictures, but he couldn't make out the contents from his spot in the entrance. As Midnight closed the door behind her, a soft meow echoed from a hallway down past the living room. Quickly, a small cat trotted through the doorway and leapt up to the dining table. "There you are," Midnight cooed, stepping across to give the cat a few pets on the head. "I bet you're hungry about now, huh?" The cat leaned its head into her hand, seemingly in bliss from the attention. Izuku felt nothing but confusion. Midnight laughed. "Izuku, this is Sushi, the roommate I told you about." She picked Sushi up, before walking back over to Izuku. "Sushi, this is Izuku. He's gonna be living with us from now on, so be nice." Tentatively, Izuku struggled to shift the boxes to one arm, and raised his other hand up and offered it to the cat. "Nice to meet you?" Sushi leaned forward, sniffing him for a moment before nuzzling into his fingers as well. Midnight laughed again. "Looks like he likes you. Your roommate is a cat? Not just any cat." Midnight seemed to appear genuinely offended by the question. "This cat has special powers." Really? Now that was news. He had read articles and reports about animals with quirks, and once he got over the initial jealousy of even animals having quirks over him, he realized how cool that was. Although, he never had the chance to see one before now. "Yep." Midnight beamed at him. "If you take a photo of this little guy, you can get Shoyuta to do whatever you want." She finished her explanation by cuddling the little fluff ball. "So it wasn't a quirk then. Good to know. Oh, trust me, you'll want to have a collection of your own if you want to save yourself a lot of lectures in the future." She placed Sushi down on the ground, the cat skipping off towards the kitchen. "He's probably hungry, so feel free to go drop your boxes in your room while I'm feeding him." Midnight pointed towards the door on the other side of the room. "Head into the hallway and turn right, it's the only door on that side." Okay." With a small hup, Izuku hefted the boxes towards his new bedroom. "When you get back, I'll give you a proper tour and order some food. I don't know about you, but I can't be bothered cooking tonight." The hero called after him. His room was definitely a lot nicer than his old one. Considering he had only been officially adopted a couple of days ago, it was already set up in the same layout as his room at the orphanage, just with newer furniture. The bed was a lot softer, and his window had a nice view of the downtown Mizudafu area. He even had his own bathroom. In fact, the apartment as a whole seemed to be pretty big, though he guessed that would make sense with a hero's salary. It was probably bigger than his early childhood home, but he doesn't have many memories of that place anymore to know for sure. He figured he could unpack some other time and just dump the boxes in the center of his room before doing some exploring. Heading back to the main room, he couldn't see Midnight anywhere, but instead there was now a very conspicuous box sitting on the dining table that definitely wasn't there before. Checking if the coast was clear, he creeped over to the box and saw the attached tag that was labeled Izuku. Was this for him? "There you are." Midnight called from behind him, just about scaring his soul out of his body. She had a smirk on her face. "I see you found your present." So it was for him. That would make sense. But why did she get him a present? Is this a welcome present? Midnight's eyes widened in realization. "It's not, but good idea." She winked. "I'll get you another present as a welcome gift soon." But then, what's this one for?" "Well, someone didn't tell me that he turned 13 a few weeks ago, so I've only been able to get him a birthday present now." She clapped her hands. "So, happy birthday, Izuku." A birthday present? He couldn't remember the last time he had gotten one of those. Granted, Sanai-san would usually get him a cake, but whenever the topic of presents came up, he'd always answer that he was fine with what he had. "Oh, and no, that's really not Dash. Izuku." She crossed her arms, an unimpressed look on her face. "I have over a decade of spoiling to make up to you. You'll take the present." Izuku gulped, before nodding. "Okay, Placing his hands on the box, he lifted the lid and peeked inside. He tilted his head in confusion. "It's you?" Midnight giggled to herself. "Well, don't just look at it, take it out." Reaching into the box, he gently took out his present, a 1/8 scale figure of Midnight. She was dressed fully in costume, in the middle of an action pose, bending forward with her whip wrapped taut around her hands, licking her lips. It was definitely an interesting figure, and from what he's seen online, a very expensive one due to its high demand. His immediate question was how she was able to get this, but being the person in the figure probably gave you some special access to it. "You like it?" she asked. "Your mouth seems to be hanging open, so I'll guess it's a yes." Yeah." He shook his head. "It's great. I just wasn't expecting it." "Well, if there's one thing I know about you, it's that you're a hero fanboy," she teased. "So I figured, why don't I start off your new collection with some merchandise for your favorite hero?" She had a mischievous look on her face as she gave him another wink. Izuku decided not to think about how he was apparently going to get more gifts as good as this. "That sounds great. Thank you so much, Midnight-sen." Midnight pouted, before lightly poking Izuku's forehead. "Why are you still calling me by my hero name, Izuku?" She grinned. "We're family now, right? Call me Mom." Yeah." Another laugh. "Or Mommy, or Mama, or any other variation you prefer. But if you don't want to, my first name, Nemuri, is fine too." Izuku quickly decided that he would not be calling Midnight Mommy. And if was he being completely honest with himself, the last time he called someone Mom, it didn't end too well for him. If it's all right, I'll go with Nemuri?" And wow, that felt weird to say. Is she sure that isn't being disrespectful? If she was offended or upset about his choice, Nemuri didn't show it. "Okay." She smiled. "Now then, let's go put your present up on display in your room before the food gets here. I hope you like curry." On cue, his stomach grumbled. "Yeah, sounds good." Turns out, his bed was even softer than he had originally thought. Once he had got over the original anxiety of sleeping in a new location, he had slept incredibly well. Something Izuku much preferred to how he usually slept, which involved tossing and turning lost in thought until eventually sleep overtook him. He was up fairly early, but he decided it was better to be safe than sorry, considering he didn't know how far the trip to school was going to take him today. Speaking of school, he hoped the teachers didn't give him any grief for being away for nearly a whole week, but with all the chaos from being adopted and moving, he hadn't had the time to properly attend school. Sneaking into the kitchen, it didn't look like Minamuri was awake yet, so he tried to keep quiet as he searched for something to eat. Finding a box of cereal in one of the cupboards, he made himself a bowl and settled into a chair by the dining table. He spared a moment to pet sushi before starting to eat. He was about 3/4 through eating when Nemuri finally emerged into the room, in a loose t-shirt and shorts. She looked half asleep as she stumbled towards the kitchen. "You're up early." She yawned, leaning on the island. Izuku swallowed the mouthful of food. "Yeah, I usually get up early." He put the spoon down. "And I didn't know what time I'd need to get up for school, so." "School?" She frowned, before pinching the bridge of her nose. "Oh right, I didn't tell you about that." The topic seemed to wake her up a bit as she fixed a glare at him. "You'll be transferring schools, Izuku." Izuku's eyes widened in a mix of confusion and surprise. "I am? But why?" "Izuku, tell me the truth." She leaned further forward, and her gaze grew sharper. "Are you being treated well at school?" A cold feeling washed through his body, and he could tell his face was pale. How did she know? Did someone tell her? Or did he say or do something to give it away? Either way, this wasn't good. If she knew about what happens at school, it's only natural she'd eventually find out about Kaken too, and if that happens, there was no way she'd allow him to become a hero. And that wasn't fair. Kaken would be an amazing hero and help so many people, much more than he ever could. It would be incredibly selfish of him to put himself over all those people Kaken would go on to save. Why yes. He put his hands up placatingly. I mean, they treat me the same way that they treat everyone else, so I can't complain. Understandably, it looked like his argument wasn't very effective. And what about the other kids? There's no bullying or anything like that. Nope. He willed his arms to not start flailing and give him away. I have friends too, if that's what you're worried about. Nemuri seemed to inspect him for a few moments, before eventually she sighed. Alright, fine. But I'll still be checking out the school myself, and at the first sign of anything I'm taking you out. She ran a hand through her hair. Besides, you're not going to school today anyway. I still need to redo all your paperwork to let them know you're my son now. Oh. Well, he just wasted his morning, didn't he? Then what should I do today? You are not going to be doing anything today. You're going to stay at home and relax, like a true Kiyama would. Izuku laughed softly, though he wasn't sure if it was possible for him to relax. He would probably start unpacking and organizing all of his belongings today, then maybe do some work on one of his notebooks too. It took Izuku a while to adjust to his new daily life, but slowly but surely he began to get into a rhythm with it. During the weekdays, he would alternate between going on patrol with Midnight, which he insisted on using her hero name during, and meeting with Aizawa for more physical, practical training. He had also learned that Aizawa had not yet been informed of his change in family status before their first meeting, considering how the man reacted the first time Izuku had referred to his colleague by her first name. She did what? When he got home that evening, he was given a very stern warning about things that should and shouldn't be said around Aizawa, and he was also forced to take several pictures of sushi in case he ever accidentally said too much again. The weekends were reserved as rest days, despite his protests. While Izuku felt that he couldn't afford to waste any time without some form of self-improvement, Sundays were now allocated as mother-son bonding days, in which someone, almost always Nemuri, would decide on an activity for the two of them to spend doing together all day. Examples of this include the first of these days, which the two spent all day out buying him what was essentially an entirely new wardrobe. He thought his clothes were fine, but she insisted. Other times, the two of them stayed at home playing games with each other or with sushi, and even sometimes Nemuri would help him with his analysis notebooks by recounting stories or experiences she'd had with a variety of heroes. Surprisingly, even school had been a much better experience recently too. While Kaken persisted, the rest of his classmates had eased up on the ignore Deku mandate and had mostly returned to normal. Only this time, there was almost no threat of a direct beating this time, only a few snide or rude remarks every now and then. Even the teachers had seemed to ease up on him, although he wasn't entirely sure if this is because they knew that he was directly tied to a hero or not. Whatever the reason, he wasn't complaining. If he could handle the way he was treated before just fine, then this was a walk in the park. Eventually, he finally started to see some progress. Through his training with Aizawa, he could feel his stamina improving, and he had even managed to pick up some basic throws, grapples, and strikes from his coaching. On the flip side, he had hung around Midnight so much that he was starting to be easily recognized whenever he was out by himself. He had even seen a few articles and posts about him in the hero forums he visited occasionally, which was especially embarrassing. Luckily, most people online seemed to just write him off as a very dedicated Midnight fanboy, which wasn't technically wrong, he supposed. He kept up with this routine for the rest of the school year, until eventually he was on break until he officially began second year of middle school. And for the first time in months, he officially had too much free time for his liking. While the last break from school he was able to focus on celebrating his first Christmas with his new family, this time there wasn't anything clear to do. And with a new school year starting, both of his mentors were occupied at the moment preparing for their new sets of students. Eventually, he had somehow convinced Nemuri that it was safe for him to go out exercising on his own unsupervised, and with nothing else to go on, Izuku picked up running in an attempt to raise his stamina even more. He'd have to do it all the time when he became a hero after all. But while he was doing well in that aspect of his training, he still felt that he was lacking in the strength aspect. Aizawa had been training him in hand-to-hand fighting after all. It'd be pretty useless if he was too weak to actually utilize it. A week later, when he was jogging down the coastline, Izuku found his solution. So, let me get this straight. Nemuri took a deep, exasperated breath. You want to start lifting weights? Only instead of asking to buy some or for a gym membership or something like that, you're going to go digging through a garbage dump. Yes. Izuku nodded with excitement. I had a quick look through it when I was there, and there was a bunch of heavy furniture and machinery. It'll be good practice. For some reason, this answer didn't seem to impress her. But why a garbage dump? You couldn't, get a job that does the same thing. He raised a finger. First of all, I'm 13, so I don't think many places would be hiring. A second finger. And second, I've been watching a bunch of old All Might interviews in my spare time lately, and in one of those he was talking about doing good deeds to help the community, and I've been trying to figure out a way I could do that, and when I saw the beach I was like, hey, maybe I could clean the beach up for strength training. And then I saw that there was a nearby pickup site I could ask to haul away what I move, which would mean that I wasn't just moving it from one spot to another, and then I could dash. Okay. She yelled, spooking Sushi, who was sleeping on the couch. Okay. Izuku's eyes lit up. Really? I can do it. I can't say I want you to do it that much, but if you want to and have a plan, you can try it out. Dash. But. She raised her hand to stop him from celebrating. I have my own conditions. First off, you wear protective gear when you do it. I don't want to have to take you to the doctor because you sliced your hand on rusted metal. Second, you keep contact with me or show Yuta regularly. I can't imagine anyone else would be hanging around if you hurt yourself. And third. Her face twisted into a grimace. You get home and have a shower before I do. Okay. I promise. He held out his fist. She looked at it and sighed for a moment, before bumping it with her own. And please wear your old clothes when you go there. As it turned out, the worst part about cleaning up the beach was the beginning. There was so much trash he didn't know where to start. Eventually he decided to clear out the area closest to the stairs, which didn't have much in terms of weight, but if he was going to move all the heavy stuff later, he'd need 8 to clear out a pathway first. On his first visit, Izuku had only ended up planning out what he was going to do, but on his next visit he came armed with a stack of trash bags to gather up all the clutter in the immediate area. It had taken him about a week to make a visible clearing of sand large enough for him to feel confident working his way up to something larger. It was midway during the second week when things got interesting. "Whatcha doing?" A voice spoke up suddenly from behind him, scaring him half to death and causing him to drop the microwave he was holding into a metal sheet with a loud clang. Whipping his head around, he saw a girl about his age watching him, sitting on top of a nearby fridge and looking like she was desperately keeping herself from bursting into laughter. He certainly didn't recognize her. She had long, straight black hair and was wearing a navy blue school uniform. Upon making eye contact, her red eyes narrowed in amusement as she started swinging her legs. "Who are you?" he asked, after several moments of silence. Immediately, her face turned into a fairly cute pout. "I asked you a question first. It's rude to ignore people, you know." "Alright. Sorry." Why was he apologizing? "I'm, cleaning the beach?" "I know that's silly." She giggled. "But why are you cleaning it?" Izuku cursed himself for still somehow being unable to talk to someone his own age. He turned away, slightly embarrassed. "Training." "Oh." For some reason, she seemed genuinely interested. "Whatcha training for?" "To be a hero." He muttered. The girl gasped loudly. "Really? That's so cool." Looking back to her, she had a wide grin on her face as she beamed at him with what could only be described as pure joy. At first he was confused at her reaction, but then he remembered that she wouldn't know who or what he was either. "Why you think so?" He scratched his head. He was definitely blushing now. "Totally." Her eyes widened as if she just received a revelation. "So, cleaning up this place is some kind of super secret hero training?" "Yeah. That's even cooler." She was denting the fridge door from how hard she was kicking it. "Can I watch?" Izuku was officially confused at this point. Was watching him clean a beach that exciting? And shouldn't the offer to be, "Can I help?" instead of, "Can I watch?" Either way, he tentatively agreed, and the girl cried out a huge cheer, pumping her fists. "Thanks, hero boy." Hero boy. My name is Kayama. Kayama Izuku. Izuku, and then. She almost leapt from her spot on the fridge, she was bouncing around so much. No wait. Zukuen. She laughed. Thanks, Zukuen. Zukuen? If he wasn't before, he was definitely flustered now. Is this how people his age normally talk to one another? The girl laughed even louder. Wow, Zukuen. Your face looks like a tomato when you get all red-faced like that. She leaned back in thought. Or maybe a strawberry? Oh right. She clapped her hands together and gave another beaming smile. You can call me Rin-chan, Zukuen. Listen, Rin-sen-dash. Rin-chan. Alright, Rin-chan. He tried to take a calming breath, but he could tell it didn't work. Why do you want to watch me do this all day? He gestured to the mountains of trash around them. Rin-chan, to her credit, seemed completely unfazed by the question. Because heroes are cool, right? She leaned forward in excitement. So I want to see you be one up close, Zukuen. That didn't exactly convince him, considering that she could walk around watching actual heroes instead of sitting here with him. But on the other hand, it'd be pretty hypocritical of him if he stopped her from doing something he did all the time, right? Well, if you really want to, I can't stop you. I know. I would have come back here anyway. Another giggle. Would the laughing fit not end? But now, you can tell me when you'll be here next so I can watch. And if she judged him when he told her that he came here every day, her face didn't show it. From there, the pair spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning out the beach. Or more accurately, Izuku cleaned out the beach while Rin-chan cheered him on from her perch on the fridge. As funny as it was to say, the encouragement actually felt like it helped him to work a little harder. Eventually the sun dipped a little too low, and he had to call it a day then. He awkwardly waved goodbye to the excitable girl as she called out that she'd meet him here same time tomorrow. It wasn't until he was about halfway back home when he realized something. Did he just make a friend? Walking towards the usual spot where he met up with Aizawa, the first thing Izuku noticed that the man was there first for a change, and the second thing was that he was on the phone. Deciding not to be rude, Izuku went to wait quietly by a nearby tree until the call ended. Aizawa, who didn't look very happy to be on the phone, gave him a small nod of acknowledgement as a greeting. This has been a delightful conversation, but I need to go, Hizashi. Hizashi? He'd heard that name mentioned a few times at home, but all he knew about the person was that they worked at UA with Aizawa and Nimuri. Aizawa frowned in annoyance, as whatever Hizashi said in response was not to his liking. I told you before, I can't tell you what I'm doing. And no, I won't make an exception. Leaving the man to bicker on the phone, Izuku leaned against the tree and took the chance to relax. Things had been hectic with school starting back up, trying to juggle schoolwork, training, patrols, and his beach cleanup visits, but he couldn't afford to slack off. If he wanted to make it as a hero, he would have to push himself even harder than everyone else to stand a chance. And if he had to lose out on a couple hours of sleep or a meal every now and then, so be it. He took a deep breath, enjoying the scent of the park in a spring day. At least, until something tickled his nose. Achoo! He tried to cover his face in time, but he was too slow. It was as if time had stood still. Aizawa's posture stiffened, and instinctively, Izuku knew that he shouldn't have done that. The only sound in the area was the voice now coming through Aizawa's phone. Aizawa closed his eyes and huffed. Yes, there is someone else here with me. He groaned in annoyance. No, it's not Emmy. He paused for a response. You really want to know? Another pause, followed by a sigh. All right, fine. He turned to look at Izuku. I've been training a kid for UA. What? Immediately, Aizawa pulled his phone away from his head in an effort to save his eardrums. Izuku looked on in concern, wondering who could possibly be yelling that loudly. Shoo. Are you hiding a secret, kid? Now that he got a second chance to listen, the voice sounded much more familiar, especially from hearing it through a speaker. Is that present Mike? Aizawa's frown deepened as he turned to look at his phone in exasperation. Would you cut that out? I wasn't hiding anything. Yes, you did. I can't believe you. Was he crying? Wait until Nem hears about this. But Izuku had a fairly good guess who Nem was referring to. He quickly darted his eyes to meet Aizawa's. Was he going to tell him? With seemingly little emotion or hesitance, Aizawa answered. She already knows. She was the one that asked me to help train him. A horrified gasp rang through the phone speaker. You both started raising a kid without me? Shoulda how could yo-click. Slipping his phone back into his pocket, Aizawa shifted his focus to Izuku. With that interruption out of the way, let's get started. He grumbled. Izuku, on the other hand, was still reeling from what he just witnessed. Was it okay to just hang up on him like that? Aizawa remained impassive. He'll get over it. Besides, he knows why I didn't tell him. Izuku didn't realize that his existence was apparently being kept a secret before now. That was Present Mike, right? I've seen pictures of him around at home. Why wouldn't you tell him? The older man's posture slackened as he went to lean on a nearby tree. Present Mike is a teacher at UA, just like your mother and I are. If that was meant to clear things up, Izuku wasn't following. And the UA entrance exam is proctored by the staff, aka us. He lectured. If we introduced you to everyone that worked at the school, it'd be impossible to remain unbiased. Oh, that would make sense. So, does that mean you're not grading it either? He nodded. Right. While I can assure you I'd be unbiased, it's better to remove all doubt. Your mother and I will only watch the exam. Another annoyed sigh. I would assume Mike will be the same, now that he knows of you. Grumbled something about being a blabbermouth under his breath, but Izuku couldn't quite make it out. Now then. Aizawa raised his voice again, catching Izuku's focus. For training today, I wanted to talk about fighting with a weapon. Weapon training? He echoed. Now this was something interesting. He still wasn't very confident with his hand-to-hand combat abilities, but he was always excited to try something new. Correct. There will always be opponents that you can't hurt, touch directly, or reach with just your hands. For that, you'll need to have some proficiency with a weapon. Aizawa gestured to the cloth around his neck. I use this custom-made capture scarf primarily, though I also have a small knife for emergencies. He motioned to his waist. We'll need to decide what weapons you'll use and start practicing with them. Weapons? As in more than one. You heard me. Typically, it would just be the one weapon to cover a quirk weakness. But in your case, you'll need something to cover both short and long-ranged opponents. Of course. Yet another hurdle his handy disability has given him. Is there anything you think I should try out? Aizawa folded his arms. That's not for me to decide. You'll learn faster if it's with something you're interested in over something I choose for you. He thought for a moment. Start with just one weapon for now, and we'll pick the other later. All right. Pressing his hand to his chin, Izuku began to think about his options. While he still wasn't great at fighting, that could always be improved while his ranged options were always going to stay non-existent, so picking a weapon with reach would be better. Of those options, then he supposed the best possible weapon for hitting someone from far away would be. I will also not be getting you a firearm license, just so we're clear. Oh, well, never mind that one. What else could he try? Well, there were other variations of projectiles, like throwing knives or blow darts, but they didn't seem as practical. If anything, using something like Aizawa's scarf would be more like what he was interested in. Although, it'd feel embarrassing if he just copied Eraserhead completely. Was there any other weapon that he could use that'd work similarly? Izuku's eyes widened as realization struck him. He looked back up at Aizawa expectantly. How about something like a whip? Aizawa raised an eyebrow. That's more medium than long range, but sure. He ran a hand through his hair. Of course, of your two teachers, the other one can teach you how to use a whip better than I can. Yeah, that's actually why I said it. He rubbed his neck bashfully. At this point, he had seen Midnight use a whip to take down a villain more than enough times to think of it as a viable option. I figured it'd be better to learn if I could practice with it even when I'm not with you. That, and she looked pretty cool using it. All right, it's a plan. Aizawa bounced off his spot on the tree and took a few steps into the open. You can ask your mother to see if she has any spares you can borrow. For now, he braced into a stance. We can keep working on close quarters combat. Quickly, Izuku collected himself and dashed out to meet him with a stance of his own. Right. Ooh. Move that one over there, Zuko-kun. That's a car over there, Rin-chan. Yeah. I wanna watch you lift a car. Izuku bit back a sigh while he pulled the fridge he was lugging to the edge of the beach. While he had admittedly made a lot of progress in the months since he started with the beach cleanup operation, he had also fallen behind where he wanted to be due to how congested his schedule had gotten. With school, training, patrols, watching hero fights and studying for end-of-year exams all on his plate, it was his personal project that oftentimes ended up sidelined. Despite slacking off with it, Rin never seemed too upset at him about it. She just told him she'd swing by whenever she felt like it and see if he's there. Well, today she was here, and she had also taken it upon herself to dictate what he should be moving. And she had been steadily getting heavier and heavier with each object. With one final heave, Izuku finished moving the fridge. Panting, he leaned against the appliance as he looked at the chipper girl with an unimpressed glare. I can't lift a car by myself, Rin-chan. He took a deep breath. I think you'd need a strength quirk to do it all in one piece. Rin pouted at him. Well, you won't be able to do it if you give up before trying. She fidgeted from her spot perched on what appeared to be a bunch of old cabinets. Aren't heroes meant to do the impossible or something like that? Izuku essayed in another lungful of air. All right. Just let me catch my breath first. Before I kill myself trying to lift a car. That seemingly didn't satisfy Rin, who let out a whine. Come on, Izuku-kun. If you keep this up, you'll never end up the cool hero you want to be. Izuku paused as the words struck a chord with him. The hero I want to be? He contemplated what she was saying. What kind of hero do I want to be? This was a good question. He had been so laser-focused on just becoming a hero that he had never given much thought to what he would do if he ever actually achieved that. His thoughts were interrupted when a finger poked his cheek. Zuko-kun. Wah! He leapt back in shock while Rin cackled at his reaction. He didn't even notice her get in so close to him. Sorry, Zuko-kun, she said without a hint of remorse. It's just so easy to scare you when you're thinking like that. Izuku covered his now blushing face partially with his hand. It's fine. I usually end up lost in thought easily, so… She tilted her head, her hair bouncing sideways. And what were you thinking about? Well, it's kind of boring, so… I want to know. Okay. He scratched his cheek in the spot he was poked. I was thinking about what kind of hero I'd like to be. Ugh. Rin rocked back and forth on her heels. Well, what did you come up with? Izuku shook his head. I'm not sure. To be honest, it wasn't until recently that I even thought I could become a hero, what with me being Dash. He cut himself off. He said too much. You being? She tilted her head the other way. Izuku cursed himself internally. He had never told Rin that he was quirkless. He was too scared to. The topic of quirks had only come up once, and he had managed to dodge it by deflecting with a non-answer about his quirk being weak, but he knew that was a far cry from being quirkless. But even still, he felt bad for lying to her. And this was as good a chance as any to rip that band-aid off, even if he knew her reaction wasn't going to be good. Oh well, having a friend was nice while it lasted. Me being quirkless. He looked away, barely managing to murmur out the end of the sentence. Well, it was out in the open now. He expected her to immediately react with some mixture of anger, annoyance, or disgust for tricking her all this time, or for maybe just existing in general. But after a few moments of uncharacteristic silence, he peeked his gaze back to look at her and saw her face a mixture of confusion and curiosity. You're quirkless, Zuko-kun? She asked, her voice missing the usual playful tilt. Izuku nodded in response. He wasn't sure his voice would work well at the moment. And you're still trying to be a hero? Another nod. She leaned in a little closer. Even though people probably tell you that you can't? He desperately tried to get his voice back. Yeah. A quirk shouldn't matter when trying to help someone, alright? Oh man. Maybe that last bit was too much. Rin contemplated his words for a moment. before she leaned back to neutral with a small hum. She looked at him for a few seconds, and Izuku felt like his heart was going to beat out of his chest at this rate. Finally, a large, beaming smile grew across her face. Wow, you're even cooler than I thought you were, Izuku-kun. Huh? Did she really just say that? Yeah. She clenched her fists in excitement. I thought you were cool before, trying to be a hero despite being so nervous all the time, but this is even better. He wasn't quite sure if that was meant to be a compliment or not. You're sticking it to all those people who say that you need a good quirk to do something. Izuku laughed awkwardly. She was definitely overselling him at this point. I don't think it's anything as grandiose as that. I haven't even done anything yet. She shook her head. Not. You're gonna do it, Izuku-kun. And you're gonna prove everyone that talks bad about people like us wrong. People like us? Did he hear her right? Wait, what do you mean? People like us. People that get told what they can and can't do because of their quirk, or for you, lack of quirk. She pointed to her chest. People always told me my quirk wasn't good for anything, so seeing someone like me be a hero when I was little would have been awesome. Her face took on an annoyed look, which was admittedly strange to see. Instead, it was just people that they wanted us to see as heroes instead. It was an interesting perspective that Izuku had never considered before. He loved quirks and heroes so much that he can't say he related with what she was saying, although he could understand it. Of course, in his case he was just told that he was worthless ever since he was little. He remembered the teachers at his preschool telling the kids with quirks that they could grow up to be anything they wanted at least. Although that wasn't entirely true, was it? For as long as he remembered. The only kid he's ever known that was told they could be a hero was Kaken. And while Izuku had thought everyone's quirks were amazing for hero work, that may have only been because he was viewing them from the perspective of someone that didn't have one at all. He wondered, if there had been heroes with stereotypically weak quirks around, would more of his classmates have been encouraged to be heroes? If there was a quirkless hero that existed, would people have treated him better growing up? Would his mother have abandoned him? I understand what you mean. Rin perked up to hear what he had to say. I think if they didn't try to shun quirkless people, I would have had an easier childhood. And it was the same for you, right? Yep. A grin returned to her face. But since we didn't, you can be that person now, Izuku-kun. Izuku chuckled softly. Maybe. It was certainly a nice thought at least, but he wasn't sure if he could ever inspire people the way some other heroes could. You know, you could always do it yourself too? Nah. She laughed, waving her hand dismissively. I don't really want to be a hero anymore. But I'm fine with cheering them on. He felt a smile of his own grow. Sure. That was too bad. She certainly had the personality for it. Speaking of which, let's see you lift that car already. Orange and please. Now then, to finish off today, I wanted to talk to you all about high school applications. You're all starting your third year now. It's important to think about your futures. Sensei picked a stack of papers up from his desk and fixed a harsh glare at the room. A few moments passed before the glare morphed into a joking grin. But who am I kidding? Everyone here wants to go to UA and become heroes, right? A loud cheer rang out through the room, catching Izuku's attention from his notebook. Looking around, everyone was throwing around their quirks willy-nilly, and up front Sensei had thrown a stack of papers into the air. He hoped he wouldn't get asked to clean that up later. All right. Sensei waved his hand down in a mock attempt to settle everyone. While it's fun to joke, I was serious. Most of you can't get into UA, so think long and hard about where you'd like to go. Get real, teach. Izuku sighed internally. He knew who that voice belonged to. Is there a problem, Mr. Bakugu? Hell yes, there's a problem. Bakugu flew out of his chair, slamming his foot on his desk. You think you can lump someone like me in with the rest of these losers? They'd be lucky to be a 2-bit extra in some B-lister's footnote. The declaration understandably upset the rest of his classmates, but he just fired back at them to know their place. Ah, of course, Bakugu. Sensei read off a page he hadn't tossed. You're applying for UA after all. Demonstrate. An explosion shot out from his palm. I've aced every mock exam, I've got all the credentials needed, I'm headed straight to UA. And when I get there, I'll ace everything there too and become the best hero in the world. Most of the class sat there in awe at the declaration, but at the same time, it really wasn't anything new than what they've been hearing for years at this point. Unfazed, the teacher kept reading the sheet and raised an eyebrow. Apparently Deku is applying for UA too. Everything froze at that statement. Bakugo looked like he had just been petrified. Izuku's entire body tensed as a cold sweat built up. Internally, he wondered why he ever thought it was a good idea to cover for this place. Slowly, everyone else turned to look at him in confusion. Izuku, smoothly, diverted his head to gaze out the window as if he didn't notice. Breaking the silence, someone snickered, before the dam broke and everyone burst into laughter. Deku? No way. That's just sad. You can't even do anything. While he did his best to appear externally confident like he was taught, Izuku still felt himself instinctively retreat into his arms. "Du." Until he was suddenly blown back by a fiery fist slamming into his desk, and an absolutely feral Bakugo was now in his face. "You're even worse off than the rest of these rejects." Now hold on Kakin. His darn arm-waving habit taking over again. UA has more courses than just the hero one. This only seemed to make the blonde angrier. Who gives a shit? We both know you're trying for the hero course, as if you wouldn't get your useless but killed in the entrance exam. He snarled and leaned in closer, and Izuku could feel his frenzied breaths from this distance. He looked like he was going to say more when he was suddenly bonked on the hand by an outstretched hand. "Thank you for the kind words, Bakugo-kun. But please leave the job of telling Deku his mistakes to the guidance counselor, alright?" Sensei said, his hand retreating back to normal on his arm. Bakugo's eyes flashed with something, but he slowly leaned back and moved to his seat. The entire time, his eyes never left Izuku's. Izuku squirmed in his seat slightly, most of his classmates finding the whole exchange amusing. By the time class had ended a few hours later, things had mostly calmed down. Izuku stayed in his seat, finishing up a section in his notebook on Himilady, the new hero he had seen stop a criminal this morning. Just as he was finishing the outline section, a hand grabbed the top of his book and ripped it from his grasp. "What Ash? We're not done, Deku." Standing over him was Bakugo, who was best described as radiating cold fury. Looking around, Izuku realized that the two of them were alone in the room now. "Pay attention, Deku." A few threatening sparks popped to make sure he listened. "You know, I tried to be nice. I tried to tell you to give up this stupid hero dream of yours, but you won't quit. Will you?" With every word, his hand shook as he tightened his grip around the poor book. Hanging out with that dumb hero friend or whoever has put all these dumb ideas about being a hero or not being useless into your head when what you should be learning is your place. Bakugo slammed the notebook into the table at the same time as he activated his quirk, engulfing it in flames. Izuku was glad that he had only just started writing in that one. "So now I have to remind you because you keep trying to be something you're not. No, you can't be a hero. No, you're not getting into UA. No, you'll never be worth anything, and finally yes, you'll always be a useless Deku." He stood up and, seemingly done, went to the door of the classroom. Izuku looked down at his desk, which now had the remains of his book on it surrounded by a pile of ashes. "And one other thing, Deku." Bakugo spoke up from his spot in the doorway. "If you really want to make something of your life and be worth something, there's a pretty easy solution." He ripped the door open and stepped through it. "Go up to the roof, pick whatever god you think will listen to someone like you, and pray to them to give you a quirk in your next life after you take a dive onto the pavement." And with that, the door slammed shut. Izuku wasn't sure how long he spent sitting at his desk staring at the door in shock. Did Kakin really just say that? Didn't he know that he could get in serious trouble if Izuku actually followed his advice, and it could be traced back to him? It was a good thing that Izuku had no intention of doing what he said. He had come too far to consider giving up now. But still, as he wiped away at the tears forming in his eyes, he wondered why what he said hurt him so much. It was well past sundown and into the evening when Izuku finally managed to pull himself together adequately and step inside his home. Closing the door behind him, he bent down to pet Sushi, who had run to greet him. "You're home late." A voice called from the dining table. "Did your friend make you stay late at the beach today?" Stepping further into the apartment, he saw Namuri giving him a smirk while surrounded by piles of papers around the table. Almost instantly, the smirk was gone and replaced with a worried frown. "What's wrong?" "What do you mean? Was he that obvious?" "Your face. You're upset about something." She rested her head on her fist. It's nothing important. Don't worry about it." With that, he tried to make a quick escape for his room. "Izuku." He stopped. He heard the sounds of the chair scraping the ground from her standing. "What did I say about your feelings?" He sighed reluctantly. "That my own feelings are important too." "That's right. Now turn around and tell me what's wrong." Turning around, he saw that she was now closer to him, leaning on the table waiting for him to explain. He scratched his head. Should he say it? "Today, we were talking about high school applications." "Right." She nodded. "And someone said something about your UA application?" "Why? Sensei said that I was making a mistake." "Son of a..." She huffed in annoyance. "Izuku, listen." She stepped forward and placed her hands on his shoulders. "It's not a mistake. We both know you can do this and you'll show him when you take the exam." He nodded, and really hoped that he could force the tears from coming out again. I know. It wasn't just him. It hurt to hear, that's all. I should be used to it by now." Namuri sighed. "You shouldn't be used to it, Izuku. I knew I should have given him a piece of my mind when I met him last year." Her voice turned dark all of a sudden. It was obvious he was faking. She turned back to him. "Nothing else happened?" Izuku looked into her eyes for a moment. "No, just that." "Alright, thanks for telling me, Izuku. And please remember, it's not a bad thing to care about yourself, okay?" He gave a weak smile. "Okay. Good, now come here." Instantly, she wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug. Izuku stilled for a moment before returning it, both of them oblivious to the look on the other's face while they embraced. Eventually, the two parted and Izuku retreated to his room with the promise of returning for dinner in a little bit. In his room, he took the tattered remains of his book out and flicked through it, and as expected, it was both unusable and unreadable. He'd have to start all over again on a new notebook. Flopping onto his bed, he pulled out his phone and looked through the hero news and reports from the day. Most of them were on the new debutante from today, but there was another article that caught his eye. Apparently, All Might had captured some villain made of sludge today in the Muzutafu area. Did that mean that there was a chance he could run into All Might if he got lucky? Eventually, he got called to come eat, and dropping his phone on his bed, he did his best to put today's events out of his head, and hoped that tonight's dinner would be edible.